Our protagonist, Johann, was excited about his new job. As the wealthy guest vacated the room, the young man began cleaning the bathroom. He was dreaming of payment already while completing his task. In all of his previous jobs, he was either paid too little or had to work extensively. 2 years ago, after he graduated high school, he had to get a job to help his father pay for his mother's nursing home expenses. He regretted missing his studies, but didn't have much of a choice. He was also quite frail and injured easily. Compared to his previous work though, everything here seemed like a dream. The toilets weren't even that dirty, and he had a good manager and friendly guests. They also let him take the buffet's leftovers home. He was so happy to bring his younger brother Philip his favorite chocolate cake. Once he got paid, he wanted to take Philip to his favorite cake shop. Fortune struck for Johann, with the lady next door recommending him this job, along with the person who held the position suddenly resigning. They saved his life. It's like he was blessed every day. Finishing his task with only cleaning the sink left, Johann noticed the guest's wallet on the ground. He looked around to make sure no one was around, and at first considered giving it to the receptionist. But upon opening the wallet, his eyes beamed at the sight of money. He drooled at the idea of taking it all for himself, but then reasoned that'd be a bad idea. Inside, he found a photo of a family that definitely seemed wealthy. Johann envied them. He wished he could have taken family pictures like this. Unfortunately, his last memories of his parents were stolen. Thankfully, nothing happened to his brother then, but he did feel a bit sad being reminded of those times. Focusing on one of the boys in the photo, Johann was shocked. Even though the boy looked young in this picture, his gaze sent shivers down Johann's spine. Johann gulped, just looking at the massive amount of money. Maybe taking a few bills wouldn't hurt. That's when the wallet's owner would walk in on him. He tried to make excuses, saying, "I had no intention of stealing. I only opened to see who the owner was." The man snatched his wrist in that instant. The oldest boy in the photo was Halbert D. Hares, the son of a duke who inherited his title after his parents died in an unfortunate accident. The wealth the sons inherited made them some of the richest people in the world. Halbert stood tall, with hair shiny platinum blonde and a statue-like sculpted face. The man was supposed to dance with another nobleman's daughter. They would have been bride and groom on his wedding day. But after 3 years, she couldn't endure his indifference and married another man. Halbert congratulated the two with his usual stoic face, but likely felt different on the inside. One day, while enjoying himself at a seaside hotel, Halbert's younger brother, Daniel, was disturbed by a particular uninvited guest. He played pleasantries with Maria Ennis, his brother's ex-fiancée. She commanded her husband to get her a chair, and now Daniel could see he was more like a servant than a husband. The meek doormat of a man was Viscount Stephen Ennis, and this was Daniel's first time meeting him after the wedding. Maria sat confident as the woman who broke Halbert's heart, as she was now the head of the Ennis family. With just a mention of her throat being sore, Stephen would run off to buy her favorite drink. The two would stare eye to eye, and Daniel would ask for the real reason Maria came here. Her face softened. She wanted to know if Halbert was doing well. Daniel started laughing at her. He knew she'd ask about him. He was surprised Maria turned out to be a human with feelings. When they were younger, he thought she was a doll because of her face. Hence, why he kept looking for a threat to control her. He could tell she was trying to appear calm, but her stoic face couldn't hide her sincere feelings. She told him she didn't regret what happened, but thought it was a pity they were unable to rekindle their friendship. Daniel thought that she and his brother must have really been in love. Maria Kings, who was known for having her head held high, was lowering herself by asking to converse about Halbert. Daniel left Maria with her husband, using the excuse he needed to use the restroom. Inside, he'd spot Johann with his wallet, Johann's face really resembling Maria's. He snatched Johann's wrist to get a closer look, questioning if this man was Maria's long-lost twin brother. Daniel smirked, getting devilish ideas. Later, we'd see Philip's eyes glimmering, staring out the window of a train. Johann smiled at his baby brother's delight as they made their trip. The events that led to this went like this. Daniel was thankful Johann found his wallet. He then suddenly received a one-day notice of being dismissed from his job. Daniel then came to him when he was stranded on the side of the road, and feeling bad, he offered him a job that paid $5,000 per month. The job was only cleaning and doing chores. All meals were provided for, so long as he went to the address. Johann was skeptical. Something like this sounded too good to be true. But with this much money, he could provide Philip with so much more. For his brother, he was willing to take the risk. Arriving at the ginormous and luxurious estate, Johann was blown away. Seeing the butlers and maids moving around, it was like watching a big mansion in a classic movie. The head butler examined Johann, and as expected, Daniel didn't explain anything to him. The butler assumed Daniel was playing a prank on them again. He'd knock on the door where Halbert was working and alert him that his brother sent another new employee. Halbert told his butler if it was by his brother's request, he should follow. And thus, the butler reluctantly accepted the unqualified Johann. The butler could see Johann's resemblance to Maria was uncanny. Looking like her twin would cause the mansion to be a bit noisy with gossip. He'd escort Johann 10 minutes out into the forest, explaining the Duke of Hares was well-mannered with a high reputation. Despite the mansion being massive and could fit a large number of people, he didn't think it was right for Johann to live in. And so, he left Johann in an abandoned shack. Daily food and utilities would be delivered to him. He wished Johann good luck and went away. Opening the door, dust burst out. The whole place was dusty. Although not ideal, Johann was excited to show his baby brother they had their own home. But most importantly, he could stay here and do nothing and still earn $5,000 per month. It was his dream. For you to like this video and subscribe to my channel, because here on my Shoujo Weekly, I'm even covering the gay stuff. That's right, straight guy covering gay things. Oh man, the things I'll do for money. Well, if you get through this and want something more, you can watch my completed series playlist on the main channel, filled with tons of stories completed in the shoujo genre. Otherwise, if you want me to post more about BL, you better hit that subscribe for real. While riding out on his horse, Halbert got flustered. He'd been following the right direction and should have ended up at the mansion by now, but somehow ended up somewhere he'd never been before. He clicked his tongue over the idea of getting lost in a house he's lived in his entire life. He'd suddenly turn with the boy saying, "Whoa, is that a real horse?" Staring right at Johann, he thought he was Maria. Johann stood quizzically as Halbert stared at him. No matter how much Johann resembled Maria, he was a man and had a different demeanor. Halbert scowled, asking who he was. Johann anxiously answered Daniel was the one who recommended the job to him, and Halbert vaguely remembered his butler mentioning this. If not for the fact that the two of them stopped talking, he would have assumed this was one of Maria's pranks. He always thought she had cold and noble looks, while in contrast, the boy in front of him had a very gentle and soft face. He found it quite comforting. Halbert understood his brother and butler were worried, but hiring a man who looked just like Maria was too irrational and unethical. Johann all the while was captivated by Halbert's horse. He would touch it, and it suddenly kicked him back, causing him to fall back with an injury to his arm. Halbert could tell his horse was angry. She really wanted to run him over and trample all over him. He'd come off her and tell Johann the way to pet a horse for the first time is to gently touch the top of their head. Johann looked at him, and his eyes sparkled. Halbert was so handsome, like a prince who came straight out of a fairy tale to save a princess from evil. His looks were so dreamlike, Johann couldn't stop staring. From Johann's point of view, Halbert seemed concerned for him, but in reality, Halbert had a scowl and was blaming him for all this. Even with that kind of expression, Johann admired his sculptured face. He assumed Halbert was the older brother from the family photo he saw. He compared Halbert to his younger brother, whose personality seemed much brighter and kind. Halbert seemed more short-tempered and cold-hearted. Johann assumed Halbert wouldn't care about him. He was hurting so bad from the kick. He had seen Halbert going in a circle on the same road 4 times. He had no choice but to check it out, and maybe even help him. Johann let Halbert know that if he was lost, he could use his walkie-talkie inside his house. It really pissed Halbert off, but he wasn't going to let Johann go. He hated the idea of Johann laughing at him for getting lost in his own mansion and having to ask for help from someone who he had no idea where he was from. It hurt his self-esteem, and his stomach twisted. He promised to reward Johann well, but he wasn't to utter a word about this embarrassing situation. Heading back to Johann's shed, he welcomed him in. Halbert stared in disbelief. He couldn't understand why Johann was living in a place like this, an old hut covered with vines, waiting for piles of tree trunks to collapse on it. Johann was optimistic regardless. He knew it didn't look like much, but the condition was fit to live in, and durable enough when there was a strong wind. Every bit of Johann's optimism staggered Halbert more and more. Walking inside, Halbert was surprised. The place was cleaner than he imagined. Johann quickly explained it was his brother napping, not his child, and Halbert kept his movements quiet as possible. thinking it'd be much noisier if the kid woke up. Seeing Johann serve tea inside paper cups, Halbert was aghast. He knew it was impolite to reject someone's servings inside their home, but then remembered he owned everything here. He told Johann to take it away. He wouldn't drink it. Johann grabbed Halbert's cup with a pained look. Halbert noticed and thought over the fact Johann was only using his left arm for everything. He told Johann to go to the hospital if he was injured, but Johann didn't want to. Firstly, he didn't have any money to cover the hospital bill, and secondly, he really didn't like going to the hospital. His mother died suffering from unknown diseases in the hospital for 2 years after battling with all her might, and that left his father and brother with a mountain of bills and debt. Then, his father suddenly died, getting into an accident last summer while working. Johann had already made up his mind not to be indebted to anyone, but felt he might need to go to the hospital now. Watching Johann wash the paper cups for reuse, Halbert gave him a staunch look of disgust. This irritated Johann. The butler gave him the necessities, but somehow forgot to bring him cups, so these were all he had. Halbert didn't like this at all. He thought Johann had a face that resembled the woman who had the dignity to be cheeky. Yet, he showed a subtle and dazed expression, as if he's committing something bad when confronted. Johann could barely handle this. He was both in pain and being shut down at every attempt of cheerfulness. He had Halbert sit inside the house momentarily, while he scurried outside to call the mansion for help. Robert eventually escorted Halbert into a limo. Johann felt some relief. He knew his place wasn't exciting for Halbert to stay at, but it wouldn't hurt to hear a thank you. He bowed before the limo window, thanking Halbert for the job. Because of the lodging, he had a place to stay with his brother, and a livable wage. Halbert turned to the butler telling him they were paying $5,000, and with him saying Johann hasn't been doing much for what he's been paid for, Johann started to sweat nervously. On the ride back, Halbert told his butler to bring Johann more paper cups, since he ran out. The butler couldn't possibly comprehend why. Obviously, it's because this is the start of a boy loves smut manhwa. Johann felt bad, because the wind constantly swished the road signs around, which actually led to Halbert getting lost. He tried fixing them before, but it kept happening. He thought about getting the tools and getting to work, but his arm was throbbing. It felt like it was broken or sprained. He then decided to take a painkiller first. Robert was irritated heading into the forest in the morning to bring Johann paper cups. Johann didn't have his walkie-talkie or even a cell phone because he was too broke, so he couldn't be contacted easily. Robert wondered if he came a bit too early, because knocking on Johann's door led to no response. He listened in and heard a crying sound. Opening the door, he found Philip crying and holding on to his big brother. Johann wasn't looking too good. He was still suffering from the horse kick. He asked Robert to take him to the hospital. He wasn't certain he could walk by himself in his current condition. Halbert all the while was reflecting on having spent his energy on useless things. Johann was on his mind. He didn't think Johann did anything wrong. He was messy and filthy, but did everything to help him even though he didn't have to. He thought Johann acted quickly and was rather good-looking. Halbert just didn't understand why Johann worried and annoyed him. He doubted the reason being Johann resembled Maria, since he didn't feel anything when he was with her, but he just couldn't understand why he kept worrying. The head maid, Katrina, would approach to serve him since Robert was out delivering the paper cups. Halbert would spot two maids gossiping about how he resembled her and wanted to know who they were referring to. Katrina tried to quiet them down and assured their master it was nothing important, but Halbert demanded they answer. The other maids shook nervously as they spoke about how Robert called an ambulance to the West Hut, and the new employee was being taken to the hospital for treatment. Halbert got on the phone with Robert immediately, and after hearing the details, he told Katrina to get the tea ready. It irritated him, just thinking about how Johann carried his smile while saying he was fine, but was in truth suffering. Halbert headed to the hospital as well, with many thoughts rushing through his mind. Thoughts like, you should have stopped saying you were alright when you weren't. We should have brought you to the hospital earlier. You sure had a lot of spirit when you said you were fine. I want to see what kind of face you're making now. He sighed, uttering Johann Rustin. Johann couldn't believe Halbert was here. Halbert looked him over and said, your words don't really match your current condition. Johann forced a weak smile and replied, it just somehow happened. Halbert's expression darkened. It just happened, you say? You're talking like it wasn't your intention to lie, like it was just the slip of the tongue. Then, Halbert spoke again, his voice sharp. Are you going to babble that you're fine again, only to make me look like a fool and bother me? He couldn't stop fixating on it. Johann kept insisting he was fine, even though he was clearly in pain. Halbert couldn't tell if Johann was naive or if he genuinely enjoyed ruffling his feathers. When they took Johann in for an MRI, Johann stared at the ceiling, trying not to panic. All he could think about was the cost. Back when his mother was hospitalized, the doctor only came in twice a day, morning and evening. He barely did anything. Yet, the bill had been crushingly high. I can empathize with him actually. I went to the hospital once for an abdomen ache, and they charged me $5,000. Johann wanted desperately to sit up, smile, and say he was alright. He wished it could be that easy. But instead, they wheeled him into a room that was luxurious. Too luxurious. Johann immediately turned to the doctor, frantic. I don't have enough money for this kind of room. I really can't cover. Halbert cut him off, irritated. Be quiet. Stay still. Then, he added, coldly, I'm paying for all of it. Johann froze. He didn't understand why. Halbert stood with arms crossed, gaze stern. You should apologize for startling my horse, he said. Then, after a brief pause, he acknowledged something else. However, I hired you, even with your stupidity. His eyes narrowed. So, I'll take responsibility for you when you're injured. Johann carefully touched the duvet. It was unbelievably soft. He knew Halbert was paying the bills, but that only made it feel more burdensome. And apparently, this was the standard ward for Halbert's employees. Soon, the doctor returned with the results. Your leg is sprained, the doctor explained, but the bone is fine. Then, he continued, the main issue is your arm. It's broken. You'll need a cast for 4 to 5 weeks. Halbert took the x-rays and examined them closely. Even though Daisy had only used a portion of her energy, Johann's arm had broken, and he was sore all over. Halbert found it ridiculous. It's outlandish, he thought. How can someone get injured this easily? Meanwhile, Johann sat there, miserable. All the attention on him made his skin crawl. Johann tried to insist he didn't need to stay. He tried to get out of it, but Halbert wouldn't allow it. You're staying, Halbert said, until you're in mint condition. Johann tried to object again. That only made Halbert angrier. It was bad enough Johann was making him look like some hit-and-run criminal, but Halbert had brought him here personally, despite being busy with work. Halbert's eyes sharpened. Stop spouting nonsense, he snapped, and reconsider what you say before you speak again. Halbert's gaze drifted back to the bed. Johann looked uncomfortable in it. He was curled in the corner, legs drawn close to his chest, like he didn't know what to do with himself, like he was embarrassed just to exist there. That expression, to Halbert, was ugly. So ugly, he couldn't stand it. Finally, Halbert turned away. Robert, he commanded, guard him until he's discharged. Johann's eyes widened. Halbert continued, voice leaving no room for argument. He is not allowed to leave on his own. Johann immediately tried to plead, his eyes wide, soft, almost desperate. Puppy eyes. Please? But Halbert ignored him completely. Robert stepped forward. I'll take care of him well, he promised, and said with a menacing look. Back home, Halbert couldn't stop replaying every interaction he had with Johann. Even though Johann had the same face as Maria, Halbert kept forcing himself to remember the truth. Johann wasn't Maria. He was just some poor commoner. And yet, Halbert couldn't understand why he was daydreaming about him in the first place. It made no sense. It was humiliating. What the hell am I even doing? He thought, irritation boiling in his chest. Still restless, Halbert told Katrina he wanted coffee instead of tea today. Katrina poured it and handed him the cup, watching him closely as she asked if something was bothering him. He looked like he hadn't slept well. Halbert brushed it off, claiming it was nothing, just an oddly disturbed dream. After that, he took a shower and dressed for the day as usual. Once he was fully suited up, he stood in front of the mirror with a faint, uneasy feeling crawling under his skin. Was his tie crooked? Was the color too dull? Should he have chosen something brighter? Before he could dwell on it, Katrina returned and told him the doctor had called earlier. Halbert immediately dialed back, only to learn Johann was requesting discharge again. The irritation in Halbert's chest flared. He called Robert next, only for Robert to report the doctor had already discharged Johann. Halbert was furious, but he ordered Robert to bring Johann back anyway. After the call, Halbert returned to staring at himself in the mirror, thoughts spiraling. He remembered getting lost while riding Daisy. He remembered Johann ending up in the hospital. Lending him a room in the mansion shouldn't have bothered him, but it did, and Halbert couldn't understand why. Finally, he told Katrina to put his business on hold until lunchtime. Then, as if fleeing would solve anything, Halbert decided to take a flight, leaving for a lengthy trip. Meanwhile, Johann returned to the mansion and was informed he would no longer be living in the old hut. Watching Halbert's private plane depart, Johann could only think one thing. Rich people were a completely different breed. One country after another, Halbert traveled without pause, moving between villas and hotels, never staying long enough to feel settled. For 10 days, he ran from his own mansion, avoiding Johann as if Johann were some curse. In Halbert's mind, Johann was a damn bastard, and Halbert couldn't understand why he, of all people, was the one running away. He was the owner of the mansion. Why was he acting like the guest? When Halbert finally returned, he realized he hadn't enjoyed his trip at all. It was the same emptiness everywhere. The servants welcomed him back as expected, but there was no sign of Johann. Robert began listing everything that had happened while Halbert was gone. How he planted hundreds of roses for an upcoming garden party, hosted by the Duchess. But Halbert barely listened. He didn't care about roses. He only cared about one thing. Johann wasn't here. By tradition, when the master of the mansion arrived, all servants were supposed to come out and greet him. Halbert was still scanning the crowd when something suddenly grabbed his pant leg. He jolted and looked down, only to see little Philip wobbling and flopping backward. The baby stared up at him with huge, sparkling eyes. Then he stood up again and began calling Halbert Mama over and over. At that exact moment, Johann came searching frantically for his baby brother. The second he found Philip, he froze in shock. He scooped him up quickly, trying to talk to him and calm him down. Then Johann looked up at Halbert, awkward and uncertain, but still visibly relieved. He was glad Halbert had returned safely. Johann still didn't understand Halbert. Halbert had been so difficult at first, so sharp and cruel. But even so, Johann couldn't deny the truth. He was grateful. Because of Halbert, he didn't have to live in the hut anymore. Even though he didn't do much work, he still received a huge salary. Halbert had even paid his hospital bills and treatment. Yet, now Johann felt uneasy, because Halbert had kicked his brother over something so trivial. Johann hadn't known Halbert could treat a child that coldly. Halbert, on the other hand, thought Johann was making a fuss over nothing. The kid was fine. Everything Johann did somehow offended him, especially because Johann had been appearing in his dreams for days. Halbert's gaze drifted over Johann's plain, messy appearance. He noticed the sweat on his skin, and still, infuriatingly, Johann's face was pretty. Philip continued chanting, Mama, but Johann quickly corrected him. He told Philip Halbert wasn't Mama at all. Halbert was a scary man, and Philip shouldn't get too close to him. Johann tried to reassure Halbert that he wasn't insulting him, but Halbert only stepped closer. Halbert stared down at Johann and asked him flatly if he truly looked like Mama to him. Johann didn't think so, but Philip's eyes kept sparkling with delight, as if he's already decided the answer. With nothing else Halbert needed, Johann took his leave. That evening, while Johann worked in the garden, Mr. Faberton told him to set his tasks aside and take a break with a refreshing drink. Johann sat down carefully, feeling the throbbing pain in his arm and leg. The injury slowed him more than he wanted to admit. From where he rested, he could see the entire mansion glowing beautifully in the evening light. It made him wonder what lay inside Halbert's heart. Maybe Halbert's arrogance and sharp tongue were simply the result of being too wealthy and too handsome. Before Johann could linger on the thought, Halbert suddenly appeared. His expression was cold as he asked if Johann thought the doctor's words were a joke. Johann blinked and asked why Halbert was even here. Halbert snapped back immediately. Are you telling me I can't go in places in my own house? Halbert didn't even understand what he was doing anymore. He kept arguing with Johann about not letting him return to the hut, to the point the veins in his forehead threatened to pop. It was ridiculous, like a high school boy bullying the girl he liked because he didn't know what else to do. As Halbert watched Johann's disheveled state, he reminded himself that Johann wasn't some nobleman, and he wasn't some model. He was just an awkward, poor commoner. Then, Halbert's gaze narrowed. He demanded to know why Johann was wearing the same clothes from the day he'd been hit by his horse. The sight bothered him so much, he blurted out that he would buy Johann new clothes. Johann could only think that Halbert had far too much money to be spending it on someone as lowly as him. But Halbert cut him off, telling him to stop worrying about Halbert's money and worry about himself first. Johann tried to respond, saying that even with all his wealth, Halbert still couldn't buy him what he truly wanted in this world. Halbert didn't understand what he meant, and as Johann stood to leave, Halbert could only think, bitterly, that Johann was really annoying. Later at dinner, Johann was happily feeding Philip when the maids suddenly swarmed him. They were desperate for the latest gossip about what he'd been discussing with their master earlier. They gushed excitedly, not only about the fact that Johann had spoken with Halbert on the stairs, but also about the conversation in the garden. They wanted to know, did Halbert approach him first? When Johann explained what happened, the maids gasped. They whispered to each other in shock, especially about Halbert offering to buy Johann new clothes and showing concern for him. These were the exact kind of things Halbert used to do back when he was with Maria. Johann tried to clarify things to the maids. Halbert wasn't buying him clothes because they were close. If anything, Johann assumed Halbert hated him. The maids, however, exchanged knowing looks and told him that Halbert must simply be annoyed. Johann still didn't understand. What was the point of wearing nice clothes when he worked and lived in the same place? He asked them, genuinely, if he looked bad. That was when Robert cut in. With a sharp voice, he ordered the maids to stop their unnecessary chatter and return to their chores. As he restored order, even Robert couldn't deny it. Something was strange about his master's attitude towards Johann. Robert had intentionally placed Johann in the lavender building to keep him away from Halbert. And yet, despite that, they still kept running into each other. Like earlier, when Halbert had taken a stroll through the garden. It was a section Halbert rarely visited, since it was mostly being refurbished and reserved for parties. Johann continued his work as usual. The mansion was preparing for the annual summer party, a tradition that had been hosted by the Duchess, who passed away 7 years ago. It had been a long time since the estate held one, so everyone was excited, even Johann. Halbert noticed it immediately, pointing out that Johann was humming to himself while he worked. Johann startled at Halbert's voice and accidentally let go of the hose. Water sprayed wildly, soaking him from head to toe. Halbert quickly turned it off, but the damage was done. Johann stood there completely drenched. Halbert stared at Johann's back, and something in him shifted. It was different from Maria. Something he couldn't decide was unsightly or pretty, but undeniably different. And suddenly, Halbert felt like Johann was harassing him, not only in real life, but even in his dreams. Last night's dream was the worst. It was sensual, too sensual, and Halbert stared furious and confused. Why did he have to dream about this guy, of all people? In the dream, Johann accepted everything. He admitted his mistakes and promised he wouldn't talk about repaying the hospital money anymore. Smiling softly, Johann said, "So please, go easy on me." Halbert couldn't understand it. He didn't understand why he was holding Johann so lovingly, why he was listening, why he was indulging him. But in the dream, Halbert gave Johann exactly the love he asked for. And then, Halbert snapped. In real life, he suddenly grabbed Johann and said, "I can't stand it anymore." Before Johann could even react, Halbert made a phone call and ordered someone to get the car ready. Not long after, the two arrived at a luxurious boutique. Johann stared in shock at how sparkling and extravagant it was. Halbert, impatient as always, told him to stop worrying and pick his clothes already. The store clerk served Halbert tea and offered him a catalog of their newest designs. Halbert barely looked at it. He wanted them to stop talking and focus on getting Johann into new clothes as quickly as possible. After taking Johann's measurements, the staff pulled out rack after rack. Everything they claimed would look good on him. Halbert told Johann to pick whatever he liked, but Johann didn't understand any of it, and his confusion only irritated Halbert more. Halbert couldn't stand the way Johann acted like a beggar. Even when he was being given something, Johann scanned the clothes. Honestly, a little disappointed. The pieces were simpler than he expected, nothing too different from what he might have bought for himself. But the moment he glanced at the price tag on a pair of pants, his soul practically left his body. The pants alone cost more than his monthly salary. Halbert noticed immediately. What's wrong? Johann hurriedly assured him it was nothing. Then, awkwardly, he admitted he wished Halbert would just give him money so he could buy clothes somewhere else. Halbert's expression snapped. With an angry look, he grabbed several items himself and commanded Johann to change into them immediately. As Halbert fumed, he turned and saw the clerks behind him laughing. The main clerk apologized quickly, saying it was just their first time seeing the Duke act like this. Then, smiling, she added, they thought his boyfriend looked very lovely. Halbert shut it down instantly. He told him that was nonsense. If Johann hadn't got soaked in the first place, they wouldn't even be here. In Halbert's mind, Johann was the type of person who couldn't pay attention to anything around him. A moment later, Johann peeked his head out of the dressing room. He needed help changing because of his arm cast. Halbert felt like he was losing his mind. The clerks immediately swarmed to assist, and Johann grew nervous. That was when Halbert stepped forward and offered, curtly, to dress him himself. Johann slipped and fell straight into Halbert's embrace. Johann yelped and shyly stumbled backwards. Halbert didn't move. Instead, he lifted his hand to his face and took a quiet breath, catching the scent of the cheap soap Johann used. It was oddly pretty, soft, almost flowery. As Halbert buttoned up Johann's shirt, he found himself staring too closely at Johann's face. His eyelashes were longer than Halbert expected. His lips were dainty and annoyingly succulent. Without meaning to, Halbert realized their faces were drawing closer. Johann whispered, "Master," in the same tone he'd used in Halbert's dreams. For a split second, Halbert thought Then, Johann ruined it completely by blurting he'd rather buy clothes at a cheaper store. Halbert abruptly turned away, stepping out of the dressing room as if he'd been burned. His thoughts were chaotic. He couldn't believe himself. Why had he expected Johann to kiss him? What was wrong with his mind? Alone in the dressing room, Johann stood there frozen, heart pounding. He thought something was wrong with him too. Halbert was undeniably handsome, but Johann tried to shake it off. He told himself he was only nervous because of the prices, because of how expensive everything was. But then he remembered the moment Halbert pulled his shirt off. Halbert looked like a superstar, and when their faces had gotten closer, Johann had thought Halbert's lips were... Johann felt like he was losing his mind. Eventually, he stepped out of the dressing room, and Halbert had to admit the new outfit was certainly better than the old one. But Halbert didn't let the moment linger. They had to hurry. This wasn't their only destination. Before leaving, Halbert bought everything on the rack and ordered it all to be sent directly to the mansion. As the two men left, the boutique manager let out a sigh of relief. Quietly, she mentioned that Halbert used to always come here with his girlfriend, but this was the first time he'd ever come with his lover. It made him seem more human, and strangely enough, Halbert was treating this man far better than he'd ever treated Maria. By the time they finally returned home, Johann was exhausted. He passed out almost immediately. Meanwhile, Halbert fell asleep too, and once again, he dreamed of the garden. Halbert's grip tightened on the sheets as he tossed about in his sleep, his hands fisted in his bedding, while Johann's name was still caught in his throat. In his room, Johann lay half-curled on his own narrow mattress, breathing unevenly. In the dark, he whispered, "Boss," followed by something faint and dazed about price too expensive. Johann jolted awake. A maid's voice had startled him. He pushed himself upright and asked what was wrong. She asked what was in the boxes. It took him a moment to understand. Then he followed her gaze. A trail of glossy gift boxes stretched from his room into the corridor, like evidence of a crime scene. Behind him, Philip stirred. Johann quickly explained that he hadn't bought them. The boss had. Halbert had taken him shopping the day before. By then, 2 more maids had gathered. Their eyes gleamed with a mix of envy and disbelief. Their questions overlapped. How much did they cost? Were they designer? Had he really received all of it? And was he seeing the boss? That last question made him stiffen. He told them not to speak nonsense. Their words followed him anyway, as he scooped Philip into his arms and stepped into the adjoining room, only to stop dead. More boxes, more suitcases, more carefully wrapped indulgences. His chest tightened. Why would Halbert do this? Was it pity? Because he looked poor? Halbert didn't even seem to like him most days. So why this avalanche of luxury? A stern voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Robert stood in the doorway, displeasure etched into every line of his face. He didn't bother with greetings. He asked what all of it meant. Johann stumbled over his explanation, but Robert had already drawn his own conclusion. It was Halbert, wasn't it? Johann nodded. Robert said nothing for a moment, but the calculation in his eyes was unmistakable. He had already been unsettled when he learned Halbert had taken Johann to high-end stores. Halbert had never displayed this kind of indulgence, not even when Maria still occupied his life. And Maria had pedigree, status, beauty recognized by the elite. Johann was a commoner, plain, burdened with a younger brother, too proud to accept help. And yet, this gesture would spread through the estate like wildfire. It was unlike Halbert. Even if the brands weren't his usual preferences, the act itself was loud. Robert could no longer read him. Then, Johann quietly asked whether someone could return the items. He hadn't touched them. Perhaps they could request a refund. Robert stared at him. A refund? Did he truly intend to reject Halbert's gifts? Johann quickly clarified. He simply couldn't wear them. They were too expensive. Robert's voice dropped into something cold and warning. Johann had better ensure the items remained pristine. After he left, Johann's composure cracked. He couldn't wear clothes that cost more than a year of his wages while scrubbing floors or carrying trays. He couldn't sell them either. That would cause even greater trouble. His eyes burned. Then, suddenly, an idea popped into his head. Later that day, Halbert stepped out of his car, the valet holding the door open. He paused. Something was different. The valet's clothes were new. He scanned the courtyard. Every staff member wore something unfamiliar. Fresh fabrics, tailored cuts, clean lines. Not standard uniforms. Had Robert changed the dress code? Loosened restrictions for the summer? They did look better. Much more polished. As he climbed the steps, a faint recognition tugged at him. He had seen those garments before. His gaze landed on Faberden in the garden. Even the gardener wore one of the new shirts. Faberden's clothes were usually dusted with soil. Something Halbert despised. Dirt had always unsettled him. Today, though the shirt was crisp, Halbert stopped, pointed. That shirt. He asked where Faberden got it. The gardener brightened. Glancing down at himself, he began to say that Johann had given 2 hands clamped over his mouth. The other worker appeared behind him, laughing too loudly, too quickly. He tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. Halbert's eyes shifted to him. His expression remained calm, amused, but the stillness in it wasn't gentle. He asked, evenly, what Johann had to do with the shirt. Hands moved quickly over the wad of cash. Johann had made far more than he intended. He planned to sell only a piece or two, just enough to ease his conscience about the mountain of luxury sitting in his room. Instead, the staff had nearly begged him. It had been their first chance to own designer pieces at a price they could afford. Their excitement had embarrassed him. When Faberden shyly asked if he could buy a shirt as well, Johann's resolve cracked completely. Refusing would have felt cruel. So, he sold a few. Only a few. That was what he told Halbert now. Stumbling over the explanation, Halbert listened without interruption. He nodded once, as if he understood. Faberden quickly added that Johann had stopped selling. The sudden pile of cash had frightened him into quitting. Scared, Halbert turned the word over in his mind. $50 for a luxury shirt? And that was frightening? The sarcasm rose in him like a bitter taste. Not only had Johann sold the gifts, he had reduced them to pocket change. Either he was lying about the amount, or he truly lived at a level Halbert had never bothered to imagine. Which was worse? Inside the mansion, Robert bowed and remarked that he had heard work had been demanding. Halbert dismissed it. The day had been manageable. He was about to talk about the sales when something caught his eye. Robert's trousers. New, tailored, familiar. Halbert closed his eyes briefly and pressed his fingers to his temple. Even Robert? Noticing the shift in his expression, Robert asked whether something was wrong. Halbert gave no answer. What was he supposed to say? That he was offended his gift had been redistributed like spare inventory? That the sight of his staff wearing what he had chosen for one person felt like mockery? It wasn't rational, and yet it burned. He turned away abruptly and informed Robert that he would be in the library and was not to be disturbed until morning. If he stayed among them any longer, the noise in his head would split open. Hours later, wrapped in a robe, Halbert lay stretched across the balcony shades outside his study. The night air cooled him. He had not realized how poorly Johann lived. Perhaps the gifts felt like an obligation. Simple responsibility. Halbert had more than enough. It cost him nothing to give. It would be easier, he decided, to step back, to stop involving himself. Peace of mind required this. If only his dreams would cooperate. He drifted. A faint movement stirred the edge of sleep. A light throe settled over his chest. A voice, soft and careful. Boss? Why was he sleeping out here when it was so cold? His eyes snapped open. For a moment, he thought he was still dreaming. Then he saw him. Johann knelt at the foot of the chaise, dressed in a maid's uniform that fit too neatly, too on purpose. The white fabric contrasted against his dark hair. The hem brushed his thighs when he shifted. Halbert's jaw tightened. He had given an order not to be disturbed. Johann said he knew, but he didn't believe Halbert truly wanted solitude. He brought wine and snacks, something to ease the strain of the day. He hesitated, then admitted he thought perhaps Halbert would treat him more kindly if he dressed like this. That sentence landed harder than the rest. Halbert seized the wine glass and flung its contents over him. Johann gasped as the liquid soaked through the thin fabric, clinging instantly to his skin. Halbert reminded him coldly that he did not drink. Rumors had begun circulating rapidly among the elite circles. Halbert de Hares, the most sought-after bachelor in high society, was said to be supporting a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Maria. For years, people had whispered that Halbert's relationship with Maria had been about finances. Employees from several high-end boutiques added fuel to the gossip. They claimed Halbert had recently been purchasing expensive clothing for a mysterious young man. When news of his breakup with Maria had first spread, unmarried women had flocked to him in droves. It was only natural. A man of his standing, wealthy, handsome, and powerful, was a prize few would ignore. And now, that same man, often called the flower of the upper class, was preparing to host his annual summer party. Robert entered the study, carrying several documents. He asked Halbert whether he had reviewed the party arrangements. Seating charts, staffing schedules, and guest lists were laid neatly across the desk. Halbert barely glanced at them. Robert's work was always flawless. There was rarely any need to check. Still, as his eyes skimmed the pages, one line caught his attention. Cocktail bar. Rescue, page 2. Johann Rustin. Halbert frowned slightly. He hadn't even known that the shabby tent Johann lived in had an official name. Robert explained calmly that the location was far from the mansion. Placing Johann there would draw attention away from him. Curious guests would lose interest before wandering that far. In truth, even Halbert himself had never paid much attention to that corner of the estate. He considered the logic and agreed. Allowing Johann to remain inside the mansion during the party would only invite unnecessary curiosity. The rumors were already troublesome enough. After all, Johann had done nothing wrong. The real issue was that Daniel had brought him into the house for entirely the wrong reasons. Halbert signed the documents and told Robert to proceed. Once the door closed behind him, Halbert contemplated for a moment. Johann would probably be happier back in the tent anyway, he thought. An invitation to Halbert's summer party was coveted, and people always fought over it. Half the guests attended hoping to secure his hand in marriage. The other half came driven by curiosity. Everyone wanted to see the mysterious young man rumored to resemble Maria. As evening fell, the mansion glittered with lights. A group of ladies whispered excitedly behind their fans when Halbert finally appeared. Their murmurs rose immediately. Had he arrived alone? Did anyone see the young man from the rumors? Who was the person he had been buying clothes for? Halbert moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting a glass of champagne as he silently commended Robert's arrangements. The guests were curious, but none of them had found Johann. The plan worked perfectly. Yet, as conversations drifted around him, Halbert's thoughts strayed elsewhere. He wondered what Johann was doing now, alone in that distant tent. Since that dream he had a few nights earlier, Halbert had found it difficult to face him directly. The memory lingered in a way he found deeply irritating. The party stretched on. Just as it began to wind down, a waiter announced that the evening would conclude with a fireworks display. Guests were asked to gather in the gardens for the countdown. As the final numbers echoed the crowd, and the first burst of color exploded across the sky, Halbert quietly slipped away. Far from the mansion, the tent stood in darkness. Johann waited beside a small drink stand he had prepared since morning. He had worked carefully, arranging glasses and bottles with the same diligence he applied to everything else. But no one had come. Not a single drink had been taken. Fortunately, he had not prepared much. His studies had kept him too busy to do more. A sudden glow lit the sky. Johann looked up in surprise as the fireworks bloomed overhead. Dazzling streaks of color spreading across the darkness. His mouth parted in quiet awe. For a moment, he wished he could see the party itself. A rustling sound broke the silence. Johann stiffened immediately, his heart jumping into his throat as he turned towards the bushes. His voice came out uncertain as he asked who was there. The shadows shifted. Then, Halbert stepped out into the light. Johann exhaled in relief. At the party, guests were exclaiming over the fireworks. But that didn't stop them from noticing Halbert disappeared. Could he have escaped to go have some fun with a certain someone? At the distant tent, Johann stood awkwardly behind his small drink stand when Halbert appeared. He immediately began to stammer, asking what had brought him here. He tried to explain that he'd prepared drinks for guests, but it seemed no one wanted to walk so far from the main party. Halbert listened in silence. Johann had no idea why he'd been stationed here. He didn't understand that Halbert had deliberately placed him far from the mansion to avoid drawing attention or gossip. While Johann fretted about failing to carry out his duties adequately, Halbert observed him quietly. The difference between this nervous young man and the bold figure from his dreams was striking. In those dreams, Johann had carried a strange, sensual confidence. Right now, he looked anxious, almost painfully earnest. And of course, he didn't appear quite as wretched. Johann called his attention, asking him if he was okay. Halbert hadn't replied to any of the comments he had been making. Halbert collected himself quickly and dismissed his concern. He explained that the fireworks were rounding up, as well as the party, so he'd come over to check if any guests had come this way. At that moment, dozens of paper lanterns rose up in the sky, and both of them looked up as the soft lights drifted upward into the darkness. After a moment, Halbert glanced downwards at Johann and remarked that he hadn't imagined Johann would care for such things. Johann smiled faintly. Who wouldn't like something so beautiful, he said. The warm summer air made it even better. Halbert regarded him with an unreadable expression before quietly agreeing. Back at the main building, the servants cleared up plates and glasses as the party wound down. Robert was ready to start seeing the guests off. By his standards, the evening had been a success. The guests, though, were still gossiping about how no one had set eyes on the Maria lookalike. They were also still wondering where the host had gone off to. Robert had to make sure things didn't derail in the absence of Halbert. He was worried he might show up with a certain young man at the balcony. It was hard to interfere in his boss's personal life, but he was worried about him. He wondered what might be happening at Johann's tent, and started to think that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to have him positioned there. He looked up at the sky. The weather was still pleasant, but he felt it might still rain. At the tent, Johann asked if he could pour him a glass of wine. When Halbert replied with an angry, questioning grunt, Johann started stammering. Of course, the boss had more important places to be than here, and there must be lots of people looking for him. But worst of all, he wasn't very good at this. Halbert continued with a deathly stare, and Johann stumbled on, saying he used to practice, but he hadn't made any. A muscle on Halbert's jaw twitched. Someone with no experience had practiced this diligently just to serve drinks at the party? The thought unsettled him more than he expected. His voice softened slightly as he asked Johann what sort of drinks he could make. Oblivious to the inner turmoil behind Halbert's calm exterior, Johann pulled a piece of paper and nervously read through it. Halbert silently wondered what sort of expensive cocktails would suit Johann. Meanwhile, Johann carefully read out a few names from his notes: gold medalists and Bailey's milk. Halbert remarked that the drinks he mentioned were all sweet drinks. He requested a martini instead, saying Johann shouldn't need his notes for something that simple. Johann hesitated, saying he was capable of making something more complicated. Halbert silently noted that he'd deliberately chosen an easy drink, but Johann was still hesitant to accept his help. Out loud, he remarked that a martini was so basic, he could talk him through it. Johann immediately apologized and started to pour the drink at once. Just then, a few cold drops of rain began to fall. Within seconds, the drizzle thickened, and the two of them hurried into the tent for shelter. Johann complained softly that he was wet as he stared out of the window. Fortunately, the rain seemed light. He asked if Halbert was okay. Halbert answered curtly that he wasn't. He was wet too. Johann turned from the window to look at him. He had shrugged out of his dinner jacket. His white shirt clung damply to his broad frame, the fabric outlining the sharp lines of his body. Halbert had intended to quietly slip away unnoticed while his guests were enjoying the fireworks display. The path to the tent could not be so easily traced. He was the host, so he couldn't afford to be absent for long. He was only going to check and make sure Johann wasn't lazing about. Still, he couldn't understand how Johann could bear being in such a dismal shelter. He looked so stupid standing there, staring up at the fireworks in the night sky. Yet, something in his gaze made him angry at the sky. What was so amazing about the fireworks that he had to stare so raptly? Why would he wait so patiently beside a stand no one was coming to? Why is he foolishly being so diligent? He was a hard-working loser, so why did that make Halbert so concerned about him? All these thoughts plagued Halbert as he walked from the mansion to the tent. Now, he and Johann stood there, taking shelter from the rain. He felt so confused. Standing there with him, looking at him directly, didn't feel so bad after all. He loosened his tie, unbuttoned his shirt, took off his cufflinks, and rolled up his sleeves. Johann, meanwhile, was clattering about. Halbert asked him what all the noise was about, and Johann answered he was making the drink he had requested. Halbert asked why there was only one glass, and Johann replied that he couldn't drink while working. Halbert silently wondered what was the point of that at the present moment. He was stuck here with wet clothes. He didn't think he should drink alone. He pointed at Johann, saying there was more than enough for the both of them to share a drink. As Johann tried to refuse, Halbert reminded him that he was his employer, and he was ordering him to have a drink. Was Johann going to turn him down? Inwardly, Halbert believed he was forcing Johann to be honest. Johann, on the other hand, felt most of the drinks were still brand new, uncorked. He couldn't bring himself to open one just to have a drink. He jumped slightly when Halbert ordered him to make himself a drink that instant. Johann replied that he couldn't make up his mind. Halbert had taken his notes, so he wasn't sure which drink to make. Halbert made his way over to the counter and asked him what he preferred. Sweet? Johann replied. Maybe. He liked sweet. He noted that Halbert was being weirdly polite. He had previously always been cool towards him. He wondered if he was happy today. Halbert slipped a hand into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper where Johann had written down his drink recipes. His eyes scanned the list. Every drink on it was sweet. A quiet chuckle escaped him. He remarked that it seemed like a rather childish hobby. Johann's face flushed red. The comment embarrassed him, yet he couldn't help noticing how much more handsome Halbert looked when he smiled. Hurriedly, he insisted he could make stronger drinks too. He wasn't limited to the sweet ones. Halbert's smile deepened with faint amusement. He asked if that was really true, then suggested that Johann prove it. The rain continued steadily outside the tent. Johann finished mixing a drink and presented it with quiet pride. Halbert took one look at the glass and noted, dryly, that every ingredient in it was sweet. Johann blinked. He had somehow ended up with another sweet cocktail. Halbert's earlier comment about his notes being childish still lingered in the air. Halbert accepted the drink anyway and asked where Johann's own glass was. Johann quickly replied that he was making it now. He'd only wanted Halbert to taste his first. Halbert told him to hurry and bring it over. How is he supposed to drink with someone who didn't even have a glass to clink? Johann moved back to the small makeshift bar, but his attention kept drifting. From the corner of his eye, he watched Halbert standing there with the martini glass in hand, looking completely at ease. He wished he could show off a little more, make something more complicated, impressive. Halbert looked especially striking that evening. Johann found himself wondering how it made Halbert feel to be wanted and admired by everyone. He finally walked over to Halbert, a glass in hand. He asked him if he'd taken a sip yet. Halbert replied that he was talking too much. He reached out and pulled him closer, then tapped his glass against his. Johann stared in surprise as Halbert finally took a sip. Then he in turn took a drink from his own glass. Halbert's lips curved in a small smile. Johann drank better than he thought. He, on the other hand, was silently unhappy with his drink. He wanted a sweet drink. Halbert asked about his day. The question startled Johann slightly. He answered that it had been quiet, so it hadn't been too bad. Even as he spoke, part of his attention lingered on his drink. He still couldn't figure out why he was dissatisfied with it. Maybe it was the alcohol. At the same time, he noticed how attentive Halbert seemed. Halbert remarked that honesty was good, but he shouldn't overdo it. Then he asked whether Johann's broken leg was healing properly. Johann found himself momentarily distracted by the sound of his voice. Halbert spoke in a low tone that was calm and pleasant to listen to. He even seemed to laugh more than usual, which struck Johann as oddly out of character. Then, a thought occurred to him. Halbert had come straight from a party. If he had left in the middle of it, he must have had quite a few drinks already. The possibility formed quietly in Johann's mind. Maybe he was already a little drunk. Halbert looked down at his empty glass and let out a small, disappointing sound. He asked if Johann would make another drink, this time the one he felt most comfortable making. Johann then hurried to the small table to start mixing. Halbert let his gaze wander. If Johann was comfortable here, he thought, then living in a shabby tent like this might not be so bad after all. A turntable hummed softly in the corner, filling the space with low music. The rain outside softened everything, making the atmosphere quiet, almost cozy. A few minutes later, Johann returned with 2 glasses. He had prepared a Bloody Mary. It was a good drink for steady sipping. Halbert asked if there were others. Johann unfolded his list again and began scanning it carefully. While he was looking down, Halbert stepped closer to him. The sudden proximity unsettled Johann. His fingers stopped on one of the names. He stammered, Virgin's Kiss. Halbert's gaze lingered on Johann's lips. What a troublesome person, he silently thought. Just then, there was a loud bang. They turned towards the sound. Johann felt his stomach drop. The cocktail table that was outside. The wind must have knocked it over. Through the rain, he could already see the glint of shattered glass scattered across the ground. Several unopened bottles lay among the debris. Without thinking, he rushed out into the storm. Rain soaked through his clothes within seconds, cold and relentless. Why hadn't he secured the table better? All those expensive drinks ruined because he hadn't been careful enough. Behind him, Halbert's voice cut through the wind, telling him to forget about it. But he had to salvage something. Fool! Halbert thought sharply from the entrance of the tent. The wind was strong enough to nearly knock him over. How could he be this reckless? He called out again, ordering Johann to come back inside. There was still more than enough left inside. Johann straightened, clutching a few unbroken bottles to his chest. Rain streamed down his face as he shouted back for Halbert not to come out into the rain. Halbert's patience snapped. He stepped straight into the downpour. Come in, he shouted over the storm. Johann looked close to tears. How could he just leave such expensive drinks to be destroyed? He must be poorer than he thought, Halbert realized grimly as he strode toward him through the rain. When he reached him, Johann protested that Halbert's clothes were far too expensive for him to be standing out here. Halbert stared at him in disbelief. Is that what you're worried about right now? He demanded. What if you catch a cold? Should I replace you with someone when that happens? Stop acting stupid, he said sharply. Drop the bottles and come inside. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed Johann by the hand and pulled him back toward the tent. Johann wondered shakily if Halbert was angry. It was the first time he had heard him shout like that. He started to apologize, but his foot slipped on the wet ground, and he lost his balance. Before he could fall, Halbert's arm clamped around his shoulders and pulled him firmly against his chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rain dripped from Halbert's hair, trailing down his face and catching at his lips as he stared down at Johann. The air between them felt strangely tense. In a low voice, Halbert remarked that it looked like the sort of moment in a movie, right before a kiss. The words barely settled before Johann. To his own shock, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to Halbert's. The contact only lasted a moment. Johann suddenly pulled back, as if waking from a trance. His face flushed deep red, as he began stammering an apology, completely at a loss for why he had done it. Before he could finish, Halbert's arm slipped around his waist and drew him back in. This time, Halbert closed the distance himself, capturing Johann's lips before he could protest. Johann tried to pull back. He wanted Halbert to wait, to hold on for a minute. His fingers twisted in Halbert's shirt. Halbert was like an immovable wall. Why did he want him to stop? He was finally able to touch him in reality, not in the dream world. There was an urgency to his movements, almost as if he couldn't let this chance slip by. He touched his own lips in wonder. It was his first kiss. Is this what kissing feels like? He felt strange, shy even. Was it because he'd never kissed anyone before, or because his boss was so good at it? Halbert's face was thunderous. Was he angry because Johann had messed up the kiss? Johann took a step back. Halbert's hand snaked out, grabbed his arm, and started walking towards the tent again. Johann panicked, begging him to let go. He was sorry. He needed to clean the broken bottles. Halbert's jaw clenched. Sorry? How could he still be thinking about cleaning after that? He spun Johann around and threw him against the wall, slamming his hand right next to his face. At the mansion, Robert noted that Halbert hadn't returned to the main building since the party the night before. It seemed he had finally found someone to replace Maria. At that moment, he noticed a car pull up in front of the house, and with a jolt, he recognized Halbert as he stepped out with Johann cradled in his arms. For a moment, he was speechless with surprise. Then, he asked if he should contact Alberton. Halbert nonchalantly replied to do as he pleased as he walked past. Robert stared at him, something akin to disapproval mixed with jealousy written all over his face. This is Johann we're talking about, the one who was banished to the remote part of the estate, like an embarrassing object to be hidden away. And now, the master walked up the stairs of the mansion, clutching him like something precious, and in full view of the other staff members too. But where was he taking him? Surely not to the second floor, not his own bedroom. Halbert turned at the top of the stairs and told Robert he was tired and was not to be disturbed for the rest of the day. Robert bowed and replied that he was available whenever he needed him. The door of the room creaked to a close behind him. Then, he gently placed Johann on the bed. As Halbert straightened up, he asked himself what he was doing. He'd made love to him. Johann wasn't as good looking as Maria, and yet, he'd never done it with her. Something must be wrong with his eyes, because why else could he have made such a huge mistake? At that moment, the beddings rustled as Johann stirred, still unconscious. Instantly, Halbert felt his body respond. He gasped incredulously at himself. Even with his battered appearance, Johann was still able to cause such a strong reaction with him. He must be in need of psychiatric help. A few moments later, Robert responded. "You called, sir?" Then, he worriedly noted that Halbert did not look so good. Halbert asked him to contact his doctor, Sophia, at once. Time was of the essence. He must have lost his mental faculties. He didn't feel in control of himself anymore. Robert hurried away to carry out his orders. He felt they both needed to talk. Only, he wasn't so sure he should initiate it, because at that moment, Maria showed up. Johann woke up to the feeling of pain everywhere. He was startled as he realized he didn't recognize his surroundings. He struggled into a sitting position, and his head started to throb. Then, a voice told him not to raise his arms too high, so that the intravenous fluid wouldn't flow in the wrong direction. He looked up to see a stern, bespectacled face. He'd never seen this person before. He asked the stranger who he was, and with a self-important sigh, we learned the man was Dr. Albert Brown, Halbert's personal physician. Johann wondered why Halbert had gone to the trouble of calling a doctor just because he passed out. Then suddenly, memories of the night before flooded in. It hadn't been a dream. The painful tingle of his lower body reminded him of what he and Halbert did last night. He flushed beetroot red. How did it come to this? He recalled they'd been trying to shelter from the storm. They'd also had a little to drink, and both acted a bit weird. But how did they end up sleeping together? Did he have feelings for Halbert? He didn't think so. Halbert was extremely good looking, but his personality took some getting used to. And then, all those clothes Halbert purchased for him. Was Halbert the one who had feelings? He didn't think it was likely. Halbert was wealthy and handsome, and he was a pathetic pauper in comparison. And an even deeper question, was Halbert turned on by him? The night before, the desire was so evident on his face. Johann looked at the doctor who was busy scribbling on his notepad and asked about Halbert. Dr. Albert curtly asked why he wanted to know. If he wanted to make a complaint or claim compensation, Robert could take care of that. Johann looked startled. Complaints? Compensation? He and Halbert had only shared a night of passion. Who would have spoken of compensation? What would warrant such talk? Suddenly, Halbert walked in, adjusting his cufflinks. The doctor's face immediately turned into a pleasant smile. He told Halbert that the day wasn't a good one for him to be out and about. The public shouldn't be made aware of this one-night stand. Halbert frowned at the statement for a moment. Then he turned to Johann and asked how he was feeling. Johann replied that he was fine. Halbert was glad, silently. But there was this lingering guilt. He'd hurt Johann so badly that he needed a doctor. But Johann seemed like he didn't understand what all the fuss was about. Johann asked in a carefully respectful tone if Halbert was the one who brought him to the room yesterday. Halbert's fists clenched at the deferential tone. So in the broad light of day, Johann wanted to act like nothing significant had happened between them. Halbert responded that he was the one that brought him here, and asked if that bothered him. Johann noted his icy voice, and wondered why that surprised him. This was Halbert, after all. He was only his first kiss and first lover, so why should he expect Halbert to treat him any differently? But still, he couldn't help the crushed feeling in his heart. They were both lost in their own thoughts. Johann wondered why Halbert was so centrally out of control. Halbert, on the other hand, felt what had happened was a mistake, never to be repeated, and never should have happened in the first place. Even though he couldn't help but think of the night before and how he couldn't get enough of Johann, it was best to erase that memory. One-night stands were not rare or taboo occurrences, and he had a healthy sexual appetite. So why was this particular instance so difficult to get over? Johann didn't seem that bothered, so he might as well do the same. Judging by the fact that he hadn't asked for any compensation, Johann probably didn't blame him. But still, since it was his first time, he expected Johann would hold him responsible. He should at least ask if they were a couple now, or just ask for something, a meaning, an explanation. Halbert mentally pulled back. What was he thinking? Would he feel better if Johann clung to him like a desperate puppy? At that moment, Johann spoke and said he was fine. Halbert objected and told Albert to keep him on bed rest. But Johann insisted he needed to leave to go take care of Philip. Halbert looked back at him. His eyes were downcast. He wouldn't even meet his gaze. Since that was the way Johann wanted to keep things, why should he be the one concerned? He walked out, slamming the door after him. Johann wondered why Halbert was angry. Did he regret the night before? His behavior made it so obvious that he hated him. Johann sighed in despair. It was so evident he meant nothing to Halbert. Being hopeful was a waste of time. He needed to pull himself together and not let this crush him. Halbert returned from Sophia's clinic disappointed. He hadn't been able to get any medical attention. There'd been an emergency when some mentally ill woman attacked everyone with a knife. Things got worse when another patient went up to her begging to be killed. It was absolute chaos. He realized his case wasn't so bad after all. His thoughts returned to Johann. The hospital was the exact one he'd taken him to with his first accident. He wondered if he was still in the bedroom. Knowing he was taking some rest would make him feel so much better. He opened the bedroom door and walked in, but it was empty. Halbert was livid. Why was Johann so stubborn? Why won't he listen? His body hadn't healed, so where did he think he could go? Halbert furiously marched down the stairs, looking in the various rooms of the mansion, to no avail. Outside, he came across Philip playing in the flower bed. He shuddered at the sight of those dirty little hands. Johann, on the other side of the garden, was trying to massage away the pain in his back. He tried to get some work done, but his body was really still unwell. He walked around to the opposite side of the garden, looking for Philip, then came to a sudden stop. Before him was Halbert, standing with arms crossed, and Philip next to him, his grubby little hands tugging at Halbert's trousers. The sight of Halbert's face set in a glare, sent Johann into a panic. He wasn't ready to face him yet. He called Philip to come over and have dinner, and Philip happily waddled over, arms outstretched. Halbert asked why he was just getting around to having a meal this late. Johann replied that Philip was constantly hungry and would eat anything. They both stood across each other in silence for a bit. Then, Johann bowed to Halbert, thanked him for keeping an eye on Philip, and took his leave. Halbert started to speak, then stopped. Johann looked back at him with a quizzicalness. Halbert asked where they were going, and Johann replied they were headed to a restaurant. Halbert was silently annoyed that Johann hadn't bothered to invite him along. Instead, Johann seemed like he couldn't wait to get away from here. Halbert told him to go ahead and leave. At that moment, Johann turned back and asked him to join if he hadn't eaten yet. When Johann extended the invitation to Halbert, he hadn't expected him to accept. It was just polite courtesy. He didn't really believe Halbert would want to sit at the same table as him, but then he accepted. The staff and chef of the kitchen were in a panic. Halbert had just informed them he wanted to have dinner. Johann would be joining him as well. This was unprecedented. Meanwhile, at the dining table, Halbert and Johann sat across from each other. The atmosphere was awkwardly suffocating for Johann. He was unaccustomed to the splendor of the table setting, the menu, even the servers. By the time they started announcing the courses, it all became overwhelming. The words ran together, sounding completely unintelligible to his ears. Halbert thanked the head waiter, then said they could proceed with eating, noting at the same time that the dinner was less lavish than usual. Johann was still deliberating when Halbert noticed his hesitation. He quietly asked why he wasn't eating, and Johann was startled. Mentally, he noted that the food looked appetizing, but too rich and greasy for him. In addition to that, he was experiencing the after effects of their night together. He didn't have much of an appetite, but he had to try. He fed Philip a little and tried some for himself, but immediately felt queasy. He tried to inform Halbert that he really wasn't up to it. Halbert's answer was a glare and a command to eat. Johann stared unhappily at the food, trying to convince himself to have some more. Then he fed Philip again. Halbert interrupted and called for someone else to feed Philip, then forcibly ordered Johann to eat. He passed a plate of foie de gras to him, called it delicious, and asked him to try it. Johann wasn't sure about that. He already felt nauseous, and he hadn't even taken a bite yet. As he took a bite, Halbert's watchful eyes were on him. He wanted to know what he was thinking. Johann chewed, and slowly to his delight, discovered that though it was a tough chew, the taste wasn't bad at all. He confirmed to Halbert that it was better than he expected. He would have indulged more if not for his weak stomach. Halbert was relieved. Johann's response warmed him inside, but on the outside, he curtly demanded that Johann stop messing about and finish his food. Man, people like Halbert are so tough to deal with. Johann once again wondered why he was so harsh towards him. He was taking care of him, and yet he couldn't bring up the topic of what happened the other night. He recalled how Halbert seemed so loving, and then wondered why he was just deluded and imagining things. As he reminisced, he felt worse than before. What was he thinking? There was no way Halbert would be interested in someone like him. Halbert, meanwhile, was feeling irritated by the way Johann was clumsily holding his knife. But he was also aware that it was because his hand was in a cast. But then, he wondered what sort of underprivileged life he led. That meant Johann hadn't learned to properly use cutlery. He'd rather feed Johann himself than continue watching him make such a mess of the meal. Johann, meanwhile, happily continued feeding Philip. Halbert watched their loving, familiar interaction as he sipped his wine. Suddenly, their eyes met above Philip's head. The mood tensed. Johann hurriedly tried to finish up his meal. He needed to get out of here. He wanted to be alone. Then, Halbert's voice cut into his thoughts, telling him to slow down. Suddenly, he flinched. He was feeling horribly nauseated. The food was threatening to come back up. Halbert's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen. He yelled at Johann to not let such a disgusting act occur, but Johann could feel the gorge rising in his throat. Halbert picked him up and rushed him over to the toilet. They made it just in time, and Halbert was quite proud of himself. He realized he should have noticed earlier that Johann wasn't really in good health, especially when he turned pale. He noted that the sounds from the bathroom had stopped. He knocked on the door and went to check on him. Johann sat on the floor with his back against the wall. He'd thrown up everything he ate and could barely move. Halbert noticed how exhausted he looked and asked him how he felt. Johann replied he was okay. Halbert's brow furrowed in annoyance. He yelled at Johann for being so stupid as to eat until he vomited. "Bro, you made him do it! Come on!" Johann stammered in response that the food was delicious, and since it was also expensive, he didn't want to waste it. Man, Johann's also a lost cause. There it was again. Expensive. That's all he seemed to care about, Halbert thought. Johann apologized and asked him to go back and finish his meal, and he was going to rest a bit before leaving. He wasn't trying to impress Halbert, he self-paraded. He only wanted to act normal, and he couldn't even achieve that. He silently hoped Halbert would give up and leave. He just wanted to be alone. But Halbert yelled in frustration. How could he expect him to leave him in that condition? After seeing him throw up every bite he'd eaten, how could he expect him to walk away, leaving him behind? He asked Johann if he could stand up. Johann managed to grab a hold of the wash hand basin and pull himself upright. Then he opened the tap and splashed some water over his face. Halbert continued berating him from behind. Johann paused for a moment, then said he wasn't feeling all right. Halbert grunted questioningly, and Johann lashed out in an angry voice. As a result of their rough intimacy from the other night, he wasn't in the best of health. His gut was unsettled, and that made it difficult to eat. But Halbert wouldn't take no for an answer. He tried so hard to avoid talking about this. He felt awkward and embarrassed. He was sure Halbert found sharing a meal with someone like him degrading. Still, he was the one who had made the move to sleep with him, and now he was acting like nothing happened. Halbert was incredulous. Did Johann mean that all of this was the consequence of their night together? So he believed his ill health was his fault. Was he now disgusted because he felt he had forced himself onto him? Johann started to explain, but Halbert cut him off. He told Johann that he wasn't a helpless child, that they had slept together just once, and that no woman had ever previously reacted the way he'd done so far. Johann blushed furiously at the last part. In silence, Halbert harshly rebuked himself. Ever since this guy showed up, everything had turned into such a mess. It was not like what happened was such a big deal. He was the one who encouraged such behavior by acting over the top. But then, he clenched his fists as he resolved not to let Johann play with his emotions. He would protect himself at all costs. He verbally lashed out at Johann. He didn't know what he was thinking, having slept with someone like him. Johann's lips trembled as he fought his tears. But then, he lashed out. He had something to say. Halbert urged him on. He wanted to know why Johann had such an effect on him. Johann then quietly said that he too regretted sleeping with him, but he would never let it happen again, no matter what. With clenched fists, he carried on that he didn't think that night was that big of a deal. Therefore, Halbert could rest easy. Halbert stuffily agreed. He was glad Johann was aware of that fact. Then, Johann took his leave, except that Halbert could feel this sudden throbbing pain in his chest. As Johann slowly walked away, he clutched at his chest. It was so bad, he felt he couldn't breathe. Sometime later, a newspaper headline read, Hares Corporation President's Secret Meeting with Ex-Lover, Maria Ennis. Robert's face was filled with disgust as he crumpled up the paper. The entire publication was fabricated slop. If it were solely up to him, he would have confiscated every copy before the household staff got their hands on it. He happened upon two maids chattering over a newspaper instead of working. At the sight of him, they jolted guilt all over their faces. He asked for the paper in their hands, and they hesitantly tried to hide it. They said it would be best if he didn't read, but he asked them to hand it over. When he saw the paper, he realized it was already too late. The maids were actually gossiping about the very same newspaper article. He was at a loss how to broach the subject with Halbert. Even though the headline carried Maria's name, the picture bore more of a resemblance to Johann. And as if things weren't bad enough, Halbert's recent state of mind was in shambles. He looked like he could break down at any moment. It had been a long while since he was last in a similar condition. In nearly 30 years, this was the first time he could recall seeing Halbert this way. The last time was when his parents passed away. The doctor said Johann had been beaten up and that his condition was a result of sleeping with Halbert. Robert felt he was missing a clue. He was the one who made Halbert's bed in the mornings, but so far, this was the worst he'd ever seen him. At another part of the mansion, a maid dramatically exclaimed over the morning newspaper while next to Johann. She asked him if he was okay. Johann silently realized that he was only someone else's replacement to Halbert. The maid prattled on about how Robert had told him not to gossip about the issue, which was exactly what she was doing. But if she were in his shoes, she'd quit. She didn't want him to be too upset with the situation. The master didn't normally behave in this manner. After all, so many women wanted him in bed, and that he probably did it because Johann looked like Maria. Johann wasn't paying much attention to the maid. He stared at the face of the woman, whose appearance had caused his employer to meddle in his life. Now he understood what Daniel meant. He shouldn't have slept with Halbert. Halbert was the sort to indulge in casual dating. The only reason he kept him by his side was because he missed Maria. He crumpled the paper in annoyance. So Halbert paid him $5,000 a month because he looked like his ex? If Johann had known earlier, he would have kept his distance. Since their fight in the bathroom 10 days earlier, they hadn't set eyes on each other, but he felt more steady now. He just needed to figure out his next steps. At that moment, Halbert's car pulled up by the curb where Johann was standing, and Halbert stepped out. "There you are," he said as he walked up to him. He asked if Johann had read the news article. Johann stammered a greeting in response, and stared at the newspaper in his own hands. Is this the reason he showed up after all this time? Johann replied that he did. Halbert then said he just returned from shutting down the newspaper company, and he shouldn't worry about seeing their logo again. Johann answered back that Halbert knew everything. He apologized for resembling Halbert's ex, and said that if he had known earlier, he would have never come to work here. Halbert grew annoyed. Ex? Did Johann really think he was still pining for Maria? She was a married woman. Johann cried out that everyone said he looked like her. At this outburst, the maids nearby began to panic. Halbert frowned, not understanding what he meant. He urged Johann to look at the newspaper again. Johann studied it. The longer he stared at the photograph, the prettier Maria seemed. He angrily wondered if Halbert was indirectly implying that he was ugly. Maybe I'm terrible, but this made me laugh. Halbert said that staring at it wasn't going to change anything. He then told him not to be stupid and snatched the paper away. Pointing at the page, he told Johann to look carefully, not at the large picture mentioned in the caption, but at the smaller photograph beneath the article. That is you, he said. Johann stared at him in confusion. Halbert sighed that Johann could not even recognize his own face. He explained that the picture had probably been taken the last time he had taken Johann shopping. Halbert reminded him that he already said Maria did not look like him. Johann replied awkwardly that she was still Halbert's ex, and he thought he resembled her. He added that Halbert was so good-looking that everyone else seemed pale in comparison. Halbert's voice softened slightly as he answered that he did not think Johann looked bad. In fact, to him, Johann looked better than Maria. There he goes again, Johann thought. How could he be sure that Halbert's words were actually compliments? This was all very confusing. He thanked him for the compliment, but he didn't want to be pulled back into this thing, whatever it was. He remarked that Halbert had probably been busy. The only reason he came over today was because of the newspaper. Halbert didn't offer a response, but in truth, he'd been avoiding Johann. He couldn't keep a hold of his emotions, so he buried himself in work. Still, he kept seeing him in his dreams. He looked better in person, although his behavior in his dreams was different, more sensual, more submissive, yet his appearance in person was still so beautiful. Johann likewise was internally struggling with his own emotions. The way Halbert's gaze lingered over him confused him. He was trying hard to maintain his composure. If he gave into his feelings, Halbert was sure to dismiss him again. So, he said that if Halbert had nothing else to add, he would take his leave. Suddenly, Halbert blurted out a question. How long did Johann intend to keep the cast on his arm? It had already been about a month. Johann blinked in surprise. A month had passed already? Fidgeting slightly, he said he'd been planning to visit the hospital soon to check on his recovery. Halbert dismissed the delay immediately. There was no need to postpone it. Johann should get into the car, and he would take him there. Caught off guard, Johann asked why Halbert needed to come with him to the hospital. Halbert replied that he had other business in the area. He would simply drop Johann off and save him the taxi fare. He should stop arguing and get in. The ride passed in uneasy silence. Johann had decided it was better to accept the offer. If he had refused, Halbert would have probably yelled at him anyway. After a while, Johann cautiously spoke up. Was it really a good idea for them to be seen riding together like this? If another photograph of them appeared in the papers, Halbert's ex might not appreciate it. It would be rude to her. Halbert frowned. He had already told Johann that he looked nothing like Maria. The article had been ridiculous from the start. The idea that he would date a married woman was absurd. How naive could Johann be? Johann fell silent. He'd only brought it up because he was worried. Still, the tension in the car made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be sitting this close to Halbert anymore. The hospital was supposed to be only 10 minutes away. Why did it feel like the drive was taking forever? He shook the thought away. This shouldn't bother him. He had already promised himself he wouldn't let Halbert influence his emotions. As soon as they arrived, he would thank him politely and go straight to the doctor's office. Meanwhile, Halbert found himself drifting into his own thoughts. Despite how disheveled Johann looked, he couldn't seem to take his eyes off him. Even the sulky expression on his face was far more attractive than the seductive one from Halbert's dreams. The realization irritated him. He silently cursed himself. When they arrived at the hospital, Johann let out a quiet sigh of relief. Finally free from the suffocating atmosphere of the car, he bowed in thanks and hurried towards the doctor's office. Halbert called after him, trying to stop him for a moment, but another voice cut in first. Halsey, what brings you to the hospital? He turned. Maria Ennis stood a few steps away. Her gaze moved past Halbert and landed on Johann. The doctor confirmed that Johann's arm had healed well. He warned him not to strain himself and instructed him to return immediately if the injury worsened. Before finishing, he added that Johann would not always be this lucky. Johann fidgeted. The cast had finally come off after a month. He should have been relieved, yet irritation gnawed at him instead. His thoughts drifted to Halbert and Maria, who were still talking outside. Lady Maria, she was even more beautiful in person. The resemblance between them was uncanny, but the differences were obvious. She was shorter, cuter, and far more elegant. The idea that anyone could compare the two of them felt absurd. Halbert must have found it amusing. The doctor interrupted his wandering thoughts to make sure he was paying attention, warning that someone who moved through the world half distracted was bound to keep getting injured. Then, he remembered that Johann had arrived with Halbert and asked where he had gone. Johann explained that Halbert stepped away to attend to other matters. The doctor decided to call him. Seeing an opportunity, Johann stood as if preparing to leave. The attempt failed quickly. The doctor reached Halbert on the phone almost immediately and joked about him not coming inside to greet him. After a brief exchange, he ended the call, saying he understood. From that alone, Johann understood the situation. Halbert was waiting at the hospital entrance. There would be no leaving unnoticed. The doctor rose and walked out with him. When Johann asked about the bill, the doctor dismissed the concern entirely. Halbert, he explained cheerfully, was one of the hospital's largest donors. Even if Johann insisted on paying, he couldn't. Outside, Halbert and Maria were still standing near the entrance, in conversation. The doctor greeted them warmly and joined them without hesitation. Maria soon noticed Johann lingering awkwardly to the side and wondering aloud why Halbert had not introduced him. The doctor expressed surprise that they had never met before, remarking on the striking resemblance between them. Halbert quietly disagreed. Johann stepped forward and introduced himself politely as Halbert's gardener. Maria looked at the hand he offered her, then at his face, her expression cool and distant. She acknowledged the introduction, but deliberately left his hand unshaken. Embarrassed, Johann withdrew it. Halbert responded with a sharp glare directed at her behavior. The doctor then turned Halbert's attention to several matters concerning the hospital that required discussion. Halbert agreed, but instructed Johann to wait in the car first. Johann tried to decline, saying he could simply take the bus. But Halbert refused the suggestion outright and told him to stop being foolish and get into the car while he finished speaking with the doctor. Johann disliked the idea. If Halbert left, he would be alone with Maria, and she'd been watching him the entire time. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Maria abruptly asked him whether Halbert was good in bed. Johann froze. The bluntness of the question stunned him. Worse still was the implication behind it. Somehow, she already knew he and Halbert had slept together. Heat rushed into his face. Maria observed his reaction with obvious amusement and commented on how naive he seemed, explaining that the question had simply crossed her mind. Johann was aghast. Hearing such words from someone like her, refined, elegant, and standing in broad daylight outside a hospital, felt completely unreal. Maria continued calmly, suggesting that his silence was answer enough. His face burned even hotter. At that moment, he desperately wished someone would return and rescue him from the conversation. Maria just smiled. It was just as she thought. Johann felt humiliated. Had this relationship with Halbert been that obvious? The thought that others might already know about it made his stomach twist. Maria lowered her voice and asked if Halbert seemed like a completely different person during, Johann flinched at the accuracy of the observation. She went on to say that Halbert could be unbearably harsh most of the time, someone difficult to tolerate. Yet, in bed, he became wonderful. Johann remembered it the same way. Halbert had never been particularly gentle, but there'd been moments when it felt strangely intimate, as though they were lovers. The thought unsettled him. He forced it away. That had only been his imagination. Maria was the one Halbert loved. Johann had no place in this story, and he didn't understand why she was confiding in him like this. He thanked her politely, but insisted that such a conversation was inappropriate between them. Maria paused reflectively, then suggested that perhaps it was because they were in similar situations. A man who looked so much like her had become entangled with Halbert and now found himself discarded. She could sympathize. It seemed that the face they shared was destined to be hurt by the same man. She added that someone as handsome as Halbert could easily draw anyone in. Johann hurriedly denied the implication. He claimed not to understand what she meant and insisted that Halbert was still in love with her. Since he resembled her so closely, he had no right to feel wronged. Maria regarded him carefully and questioned whether he really believed Halbert had feelings for her. She admitted that she herself had once believed in that illusion. Otherwise, she would not have stayed with him for 3 years. But eventually, she had realized the truth. Halbert loved only himself. Before Johann could respond, a cheerful voice called Maria's name. Her husband Stefan approached with an umbrella he had gone to fetch for her. Maria reacted with visible impatience at his exuberance. She turned back to Johann with a small shrug, suggesting that perhaps Halbert simply had a fixation with that particular face. After all, he had even slept with one of his own employees. That was unscrupulous behavior. Stefan reached them moments later, bright and energetic, and Maria moved to his side. As she prepared to leave, she offered Johann a polite farewell and asked him to remind Halbert to be careful. Another scandal involving her name would damage her reputation. Stefan, noticing Johann more closely, blurted out how strikingly alike the two of them looked. Maria quickly hushed him. Left standing alone, Johann replayed her words in his mind. He already knew Halbert did not truly care for him. Anyone looking from the outside would assume he was the one destined to be hurt. Whenever he looked into Halbert's eyes, he lost the ability to stop himself. Perhaps it was all in his head, but the truth remained the same. Whether Halbert cared or not, Johann loved him. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about him. What was going on in his mind? The look on his face, it bothered him so much. He wished he'd just say something. Suddenly, Johann spoke up. He asked about Halbert's 3-year relationship with Maria. Didn't he have feelings for her while they were together? Halbert replied that it was just a casual dating relationship, without emotional attachments, and Maria was aware of the situation. He wondered if this was the reason for Johann's solemn expression, that he believed he slept with him because of his resemblance to Maria? He wasn't that kind of person. Johann vaguely acknowledged his response, while silently noting that Maria's observations seemed credible. If Halbert felt so detached towards someone he'd been in a long-term relationship with, how could he possibly have feelings for a one-night stand? Their societal status was worlds apart. So what was he hoping for? On and on, he continued to silently scold himself for getting involved with Halbert. When the car came to a stop in front of the mansion, they both stepped out, and Johann thanked him for all the support, including the medical expenses. Halbert nodded dismissively, saying he didn't do it to obtain his gratitude. He advised him to take things easy now that his cast was off. Johann bowed and said their paths would not likely cross so often anymore. He thanked Halbert for the hospitality he had shown him and Philip, but now that he had recovered, it was time for him to return where he belonged. Halbert had not expected that. He asked when Johann planned to leave. That evening, the answer sent a sharp pulse of panic through Halbert. So soon? The thought of Johann no longer being within reach unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. For a moment, he had no idea what he should say or do. To Johann, however, the decision felt simple. A small secluded shelter was enough. Then, he could quietly care for his little brother, just as he had before. Whatever feelings he might have for Halbert, there was no certainty they would lead anywhere. At that moment, Philip came running towards him with outstretched arms. Robert stood a short distance behind. Johann scooped the boy up and asked how he'd been doing. He thanked Robert sincerely for always looking after Philip whenever circumstances forced him to suddenly leave. Robert responded with a restrained smile, remarking that Johann's cast had finally been removed. Johann acknowledged it and said he was ready to resume his duties. Robert then suggested Johann express his gratitude before leaving, and Johann immediately turned back to Halbert and bowed again. To Halbert, the gesture felt too eager, almost as if Johann could not wait to be gone. He asked whether Johann was truly planning to return to that shabby cabin. Johann said yes. Without hesitation, he turned away and began guiding Philip along as they walked off together. Robert watched them go before asking Halbert if he wished to head somewhere else. "No, I don't," Halbert replied. Johann stood before the shabby little cottage. It looked almost the same, only the weeds had grown taller. Time seemed to have stopped here. No one cleaned since the summer party 2 weeks ago. Spoiled food lay where it had been left. Spiderwebs crept along the walls. The wine glasses they had drunk from still sat unwashed. Halbert's clothes were scattered on the floor where he tossed them before they'd... Johann picked up Halbert's shirt and brought it to his nose. That night had been unforgettable. Halbert treated him as if he truly loved him. Maybe he only remembered it that way because he'd been so excited. Or maybe there had actually been something in the air. "Is this what heartbreak feels like?" he whimpered, wiping tears from his face. Their parents were gone, but he and Philip had been managing well enough. He had to pull himself together. Tomorrow morning, he would start cleaning the cabin. A weak voice called out. Philip, who had been asleep, had just woken up. Johann smiled at him and asked if he was hungry. Philip only whimpered. When Johann asked what was wrong, the boy pressed a hand to his stomach and said it hurt. Johann touched his forehead. It was burning hot, just like the day their mother died. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to think. Robert had given him medicine for emergencies. Thank goodness. He found the bottle and gave Philip a dose. Minutes crawled by, then more. Soon, half the bottle was gone. Yet, the fever refused to break. Johann's thoughts spiraled. He didn't know what else to do. Then, he saw the walkie-talkie. He grabbed it and shouted into it, begging for anyone who could hear him to help. There was no answer. With a cry of frustration, he hurled it against the wall. It shattered. He sank to the floor, clutching his head as tears streamed down his face. It was just like before. His mother's fever had spiked, and he'd been helpless then too. No medicine had worked. That was how she died. No, he wasn't going to let that happen again. He scooped Philip into his arms and begged him to hold on. Then he ran into the night. Halbert glanced up as a figure streaked past. He frowned and wondered if it was Johann. A few hours earlier, Halbert had laid on his bed, ready for sleep. It had been a long time since he'd enjoyed a proper night's rest. The day had been especially exhausting, and he expected the fatigue to finally grant him a few hours of deep sleep. As he slowly drifted off, he was certain that by morning, he would wake up with a clear mind, free from the thoughts of Johann. Sometime later, he blinked awake. How long had he slept? This was the first in a while he'd slept without being plagued by intrusive dreams. His thoughts had barely formed before his eyes widened. Johann. He hadn't dreamt of anything, not even him. It was the first time since meeting Johann that his image had not crept into Halbert's dreams. Yet, nothing about his situation had changed. He was still in the same decrepit cabin on the mansion grounds. So what changed? Could it be because he said they wouldn't be seeing much of each other anymore? The thought sent a sharp pain through his chest. He clutched at it, despair tightening around him like a chokehold. It wasn't as though he was leaving the country. Johann lived barely 10 minutes away, so why would they never meet again? He didn't care when Daniel was away for 3 whole years. Yet now, the mere idea of not seeing Johann was driving him mad. He needed a reason to see him, any reason, even a flimsy excuse. The feeling clawing at his chest was strangely familiar, though he had never truly experienced it before. Love. Back in the present, Halbert called out to Johann. Johann turned towards him. Philip slumped weakly against his back. Tears streamed down his face. Halbert had only come to confirm his feelings, but seeing Johann like this, his words caught in his throat. "What's wrong?" he asked. Johann's voice trembled as he replied that he needed to take Philip to the hospital immediately. If Halbert could wait, they could talk later. Halbert snapped. He asked what Johann was thinking. How could he run off like this at this hour of the night? Then, the anger left him as quickly as it came. Realizing what he'd done, he exhaled and steadied himself. He apologized. He shouldn't have yelled. Halbert asked what was wrong with his brother, and if he could help. Johann drew in a shaky breath, then explained that Philip had been running a fever for a while now, and that despite giving him the medicine provided by Robert, he didn't seem to be getting any better. He apologized, saying he had to quickly leave, but Halbert grabbed his arm, asking him to wait for a second. Johann struggled against his grip, panic breaking through his voice. "Please, let go. Philip might." Halbert told him to follow him. He would give them a ride. The last thing Johann wanted was to accept help from Halbert again. He planned to forget about him completely, but there was no time to argue. At the hospital, they waited in silence. Halbert sat in one of the chairs, occasionally stealing glances at Johann, who had chosen to sit on the floor instead. Curled in on himself, he looked pitiful, like a puppy that had lost its owner. There were empty seats everywhere. Why sit on the cold floor? Sitting there wouldn't make the wait any shorter. Earlier, Johann had been trembling so badly. The fear on his face had been impossible to miss. If he was that scared, it would be better to cry and let it out. Halbert didn't think he could keep watching him like this. He tapped the empty seat beside him. "Come sit here," he said quietly. "It's almost dawn. We should at least try to get some rest." Johann didn't respond. He was lost in his own thoughts, terrified. It felt just like the night his mother died. Back then, he had also waited helplessly, unable to do anything. It had been over an hour now. What if Philip died too? Yes, their mother had always been sickly, but her death had still come so suddenly. When their parents died, he endured it because he still had Philip. But if Philip died, he'd be completely alone in the world. Tears streamed silently down his face. "Please, don't take my brother," he prayed. The chair behind him squeaked as Halbert stood. Halbert walked over and stopped in front of him. "Stand up," he said. Johann rose slowly. What is it?" Halbert didn't answer. Instead, he pulled Johann into his arms. For a moment, Johann stood stiffly in shock. Then, his arm slowly came up around Halbert's neck. He buried his face into his shoulder, and the sobs he had been holding back finally broke free. Halbert had never seen him cry like this before. Even when Halbert said harsh, hurtful things in the past, Johann had never shed a single tear. The truth was, Halbert realized he barely knew anything about him. All he knew was that Johann's parents were dead, and that he had just turned 20. At that age, most people were still enjoying life, spending their parents' money. But Johann, he was struggling to maintain that crumbling cabin while working to support his younger brother entirely on his own. Halbert thought he was stupid for holding it in, not for crying. He must have been holding everything inside for so long. Halbert tightened his arms around him. Right now, he only wanted to hold him a little longer. Halbert held Johann as the sobs gradually slowed. For so long, Johann had carried himself like someone much older than his age. Quiet, responsible, never asking anything from anyone. Seeing him break down like this felt strangely right. He simply kept a steady hand on his back while Johann cried. A dull ache settled in his chest. He'd never felt sympathy for anyone before, not like this. But when it came to Johann, he found he couldn't just sit back and ignore him. Eventually, the sobbing faded. Johann pulled in a shaky breath and lifted his head. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, as if he had forgotten where he was. Then, he realized he was still in Halbert's arms. His eyes widened. "I'm sorry." He stepped back quickly, nervously. At the same time, a quiet thought crept into his mind. Why was Halbert being so gentle? Every time Halbert treated him kindly like this, Johann ended up misunderstanding things, and it always hurt later. Halbert didn't move. Even with the distance between them, he could still catch the faint scent of Johann. Sweaty, but something uniquely his. It was distracting. Johann's face was flushed and blotchy from crying. His lashes were damp. His breathing hadn't completely steadied yet. For some reason, that only made Halbert look at him longer. Something tight twisted in his chest. Before he could stop himself, Halbert grabbed Johann by the shoulders and pushed him back against the wall. Johann gasped, and then Halbert kissed him. It wasn't gentle. The suddenness of it stunned Johann for a moment. His hands pressed weakly against Halbert's chest, trying to push him away. But Halbert didn't move. The kiss deepened, desperate and impulsive. Johann's resistance faltered. Then he gave in. But even as it happened, his thoughts were racing. No, he had finally decided to forget Halbert. He had forced himself to move on. And now this, after this kiss, Halbert would probably go back to treating him coldly again. That was how it always went. Why did he keep doing this? The frustration finally broke through. Johann shoved him hard. Halbert stumbled back and the kiss broke. They barely had time to catch their breath before a voice called out across the waiting room. "Johann?" Both of them turned. There was an update on Philip's condition. The test results came back clear. Philip's fever had broken, and the doctor assured Johann that sudden fevers were common in children his age. It had been the right decision to bring him in so quickly, but there was no immediate danger. A few additional tests would be done later. For now, Philip slept peacefully. Johann was free to take him home. Relief rushed through him. For hours, he'd been bracing himself for the worst, imagining what life would look like if Philip were gone. Carefully, he gathered the sleeping boy into his arms. Halbert had already turned towards the exit. The drive home was, once again, awkward and quiet. Johann's mind kept drifting back to the hospital hallway, to the wall, Halbert's lips against his. The memory still burned in his chest. Johann cleared his throat, awkwardly offering his thanks. If Halbert hadn't been there, Johann had no idea how he would have gotten Philip to the hospital in the middle of the night. And Halbert hadn't simply dropped him off and left. He had stayed until everything was finished. Halbert acknowledged it with nothing more than a brief sideways glance and a low grunt. Johann's shoulders sank. There it was again, that cold distance Halbert always retreated behind, as though the warmth from earlier had never existed. The kiss still lingered vividly in Johann's memory, yet Halbert behaved like it had meant nothing at all. Frustration slowly coiled inside him. Halbert had a way of doing this, suddenly appearing when Johann needed help, stepping in like some kind of rescuer. And just when Johann began to believe that maybe there was something more behind those moments, Halbert would shut the door again. Johann had tried many times to keep his distance, but Halbert had always found some way to break through his defenses, and then he would push him away just as quickly. It was exhausting. Eventually, the pressure of the question became too heavy to ignore. He turned slightly in his seat, gathering the courage to ask about the kiss earlier. Halbert's eyes flicked towards him, as though the question itself made no sense. For a brief moment, something almost like irritation flashed across his face, as if the answer should have been obvious. Johann quickly tried to soften the moment, explaining that he understood it had probably been a mistake. Still, if moments like that kept happening, what would Halbert do if he ended up falling for him? Halbert shot Johann a glare, confusion and irritation tightening his jaw. Confused? What did Johann mean by that? The only reason Halbert was upset was because of the way Johann had shoved him away in the hospital hallway, and it hadn't been a gentle push either. Johann had pushed him hard enough to make the rejection unmistakable. Halbert knew they weren't anything serious. There had never been any clear understandings between them, so technically, Johann had every right to push him away. Still, did that mean Johann hated kissing him that much? The thought soured his mood further. Halbert was dimly aware that he'd been acting cold for no good reason since they left the hospital. but he couldn't understand why Johann would suddenly draw a line at something like that. He knew that by the time they arrived at the mansion, Johann would retreat with his usual response, a quiet thank you, and then disappear back into that lonely cabin of his. And that would have been the end of it. Halbert scowled faintly to himself. He couldn't even explain why this was bothering him so much. A part of him wondered why he cared at all. Johann's hesitant voice pulled him from his thoughts. He was trying to explain himself, saying he didn't want to be foolish enough to expect anything from Halbert. After all, he already knew Halbert didn't like him. Halbert frowned immediately. Wrong. He shot back that he didn't hate Johann at all. If anything, Johann was the one who clearly didn't like him. The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. A quiet voice in the back of Halbert's mind whispered, "What if Johann agrees?" Halbert found himself waiting for the answer rather anxiously. Johann finally spoke, his voice low. He admitted that he did like Halbert, and that was precisely why everything had become so complicated. Halbert's thoughts came to a screeching halt. His heartbeat kicked violently against his ribs. Had Johann really just said that? He turned towards him sharply, disbelief written plainly across his face. Then why had he pushed him away earlier? Halbert couldn't understand it. Johann always seemed to say things without thinking about what they meant. Johann hurriedly tried to explain himself. They had been standing in the middle of a hospital hallway. Philip was sick. That wasn't the right moment. Yet, even as he spoke, doubt crept into his own thoughts. Why was he making excuses? The truth was that he had asked those questions because he wanted to be taken seriously. He wanted to know what Halbert actually felt, because it seemed as if Halbert didn't care about his feelings at all. And somehow, in the middle of all that, he had accidentally confessed that he liked him. He never intended to reveal that. Halbert repeated Johann's explanation slowly, disbelief still lingering in his voice. So, Johann had pushed him away because they were at a hospital, because Philip had been sick. Nothing more than that. Johann flushed and turned his face away, clearly embarrassed. Halbert shifted in his seat, turning his body fully towards him. His hand settled lightly on Johann's thigh. Then he asked what excuse Johann planned to use now. They weren't in the hospital anymore. Philip was asleep. Was the driver going to be the next excuse? The partition between the front and back seats was already closed. Johann stammered that Halbert was sitting too close, but Halbert only smiled. Halbert pressed closer as he questioned whatever excuse Johann might offer next. Johann rested a tentative hand on his shoulder. Halbert closed his eyes, already bracing for the expected rejection. Instead came the soft press of lips against his own. His eyes flew open in surprise. This time, Johann had initiated the kiss. Halbert exhaled shakily and leaned in, hands rising to cradle Johann's face with careful tenderness. The kiss was clumsy, uncertain, yet it struck Halbert, raw and unguarded in a way he could not explain. Every hesitant movement carried an intensity that unraveled him further. Johann, lost in the moment, wondered if he was getting it right at all. The heat flooding through him left him breathless and overwhelmed. Halbert sensed Johann's hesitation and eased back to guide with gentle touches and quiet encouragement. Doubt still lingered in Johann's mind. Tomorrow, Halbert would likely retreat behind that familiar cold mask, just as he had before. At the front door, Robert waited as the car rolled to a stop. He straightened to greet Halbert, then froze at the sight of Johann beside him. Hadn't he already returned to his cabin earlier? He questioned in his mind. Halbert issued quiet instructions to place Philip in Robert's care. When Robert began to object, Halbert cut him off. No questions, just obedience. He took Johann's hand, firm, possessive, and led him up the staircase. The bedroom door had barely closed before Halbert pressed against it. Urgency shattered restraint. Clothes fell away in hurried tugs. Johann tensed, eyes glistening with sudden tears. The cry came in a cracked plea. If Halbert didn't slow, he was going to get hurt again. Halbert froze at once. He straightened up and pulled Johann into his arms. Then he met his gaze and promised with quiet sincerity that they would go as slow as Johann needed. When Johann's eyes fluttered open, morning light filled the room. He was alone. The familiar ache of abandonment settled in his chest as he tried to sit up, only to feel the fresh constellation of bruises and tenderness mapping every movement. Proof of the night evident on his skin. He moved slowly towards the door, already bracing himself for the old pattern. Halbert gone again, the space between them cold once more. Why would this time be any different? What else was a single night supposed to mean? Then he saw it, a folded note resting on the bedside table. Halbert had urgent matters to attend to and would return soon. Johann was not to vanish back to the cabin. Signed, Halbert Hares. A quiet warmth bloomed through Johann's chest, spreading all over his body. Halbert actually cared. A firm voice sounded from the hallway. Robert? Asking if he was inside. Johann startled, and then steadied himself and invited him in. The door opened. Little Philip toddled forward with bright, unhesitating joy. Johann scooped him up, pressing the small body close in a tender embrace. Robert stood quietly in the doorway, expression solemn. He studied Johann for a long moment, silently wondering what drove Halbert's actions. Just before leaving that morning, Halbert had given him firm instructions. Johann was not to return to the cabin. The structure would be demolished upon his return. Dang, he's making sure Johann can't leave. Johann stared at Robert in disbelief. Robert had just informed him that Halbert had given instructions, that he was no longer allowed to return to the cabin. If he couldn't go back, then where was he supposed to live? Was he to return to Lavender Hall? Robert calmly explained that as per Halbert's instructions, Johann would be staying in the mansion, in Halbert's master bedroom. Johann's mind blinked. The suggestion alone made him feel uneasy. He immediately asked when Halbert would return. Robert couldn't say. Halbert hadn't given a date. Johann insisted that he needed to speak to Halbert directly. After a moment's hesitation, Robert wrote down a number on a small slip of paper and handed it to him. Robert warned him not to call too often or bother Halbert with unnecessary questions. Johann nodded nervously and dialed. As the phone rang, his heart began to pound. He rehearsed different ways to bring up the subject in his mind, wondering whether Halbert would even answer. After several rings, the call connected. Johann hurriedly introduced himself. Halbert's voice sounded calm on the other end. He already knew who was calling. The number belonged to the line in his bedroom. The realization only made Johann more self-conscious. He asked when Halbert planned to return home. The answer was vague. Perhaps 3 or 4 days. Johann felt a small wave of relief. At least it wasn't longer than that. He thanked Halbert for allowing him to stay in the room, though he admitted it felt far too grand for someone like him. Halbert dismissed the concern immediately. Instead, he pointed out something that silenced Johann immediately. Did Johann want Philip to fall sick again? Johann hadn't considered that. Before he could respond, Halbert gave him another instruction: clean the room. The order confused him at first. The room hardly looked like it needed cleaning, but Johann agreed anyway and asked Halbert to return home soon. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Halbert said he would. The call ended. Johann lowered the phone slowly. He missed him. The master bedroom turned out to be spotless. There was nothing to clean. Johann stood in the middle of the room, feeling restless. With nothing else to do, he decided to take a walk through the garden. Faberdun and Peter spotted him. They were clearly surprised to see him back at the mansion after so long. Both men asked if he was all right. Rumors had spread among the staff that Halbert had done something terrible to him. Many of them believed Johann's resemblance to Maria had brought him nothing but trouble. Johann quickly corrected them. Halbert's behavior had nothing to do with Maria. As he explained himself, he suddenly realized how fiercely he was defending Halbert. He even mentioned something Halbert had told him, that Johann was the first person ever allowed to spend the night in his bedroom. They asked him if Halbert ever actually said that he liked him. Their concern was genuine. They simply didn't want to see Johann get hurt. The question lingered in Johann's mind long after the conversation ended. 4 days passed. Halbert still hadn't returned, and there hadn't been a single phone call. Johann tried to stay patient, but the conversation with Peter and Faberdun kept replaying in his thoughts. Eventually, the silence became unbearable. He decided it was better to call than sit around worrying. Halbert answered quickly. His voice carried a note of impatience as he asked whether something was wrong. All the things Johann had planned to say were caught in his throat. His greeting came out awkward and hesitant. Then he heard something else through the phone. The sharp sound of heels striking the floor. A woman's voice followed. "Halsey, you know you can't use your phone in here." Johann froze at the sound of the woman's voice drifting through the phone. Maria's voice. Halbert's tone cut in sharply afterward, clipped and preoccupied. He could not take calls now. Anything non-urgent would wait until later. Johann murmured an apology, cheeks warming with embarrassment. He hadn't realized Halbert was occupied. He would end the call. 6 days passed in silence. No return call came. Johann told himself Halbert must be swamped with obligations as he moved quietly through the bedroom, wiping down polished surfaces. The room breathed understated elegance, nothing ostentatious. This was where Halbert began each day, Johann thought, settling unbriefly into the armchair by the window. He pictured Halbert there in the soft morning light, coffee in hand, newspaper open. The image tightened something in his chest. He missed him. A small, hiccuping sob broke the quiet. Johann rose and opened the door to find Philip standing there, eyes red and glistening. He knelt, lifting the boy into his arms. Philip pressed his face against Johann's shoulder, mumbling through tears that his big brother was not stupid, not a fool. Whispers from others had reached him, and the child defended Halbert with fierce, childish loyalty. Johann rocked him gently, murmuring comfort, until the small body grew heavy with sleep. Philip was right, he thought. Halbert was no fool, and neither was he. Waiting here, suspended in hope, he dialed Halbert's number again. This time, it went straight to voicemail, unavailable. He ended the call without leaving a message. A missed call would likely go unnoticed or ignored. He had responsibilities. He had Philip to take care of. Just then, a cheerful voice rang from the hallway, calling for Halbert with easy familiarity. Footsteps approached. The bedroom door swung wider, and the smile on Daniel Hares's face faltered the moment he saw Johann standing there alone. Daniel, Halbert's younger brother, traveled the world on whims, dropping in unannounced to tease his older sibling about rigid routines and old-fashioned habits. He loved Halbert fiercely. They were all the family either had left. Finding a stranger in this private space clearly unsettled him. Then, recognition dawned when Johann reintroduced himself. Daniel's brows lifted in surprise, then amusement, as he placed Johann. But Johann's expression remained tight, wounded. He accused Daniel of sending him to Halbert deliberately, knowing the resemblance to Maria. Curious to watch the reaction unfold, tears welled as Johann's voice trembled with the question. Did wealth grant them permission to toy with the feelings of those beneath them? Daniel's gaze sharpened. He noticed the faint, faded marks peeking above Johann's collar. Marks that spoke of intensity, perhaps roughness. Shock flickered through his features. He had never imagined Halbert capable of leaving such traces, especially on someone who echoed Maria so strongly. He asked about Halbert's whereabouts. Johann shook his head. He had no idea. He moved towards the door, shoulders squandered with new resolve. Daniel should tell Halbert that Johann was gone. Halbert could stop running and return home. If he'd only been honest sooner, Johann would not have lingered in pain for so long. He crossed to the sleeping Philip, gathering the small boy gently against his chest, and walked out. Behind him, Daniel's voice rose in a half-hearted attempt to call him back. But Johann did not pause. Daniel was deeply remorseful. He caused Johann so much hurt for the sake of amusement. He knew an apology was hopelessly inadequate. Halbert returned to the mansion. Robert greeted him with a bow and offered dinner. Halbert waved the suggestion away, already striding towards the bedroom in search of Johann. The room stood empty. He turned to Robert. Where was Johann? Robert hesitated, assuming he had been waiting here, perhaps stepped outside the garden for air. Halbert searched the garden, but couldn't find him. He instructed Robert to send someone to bring Johann at once. Minutes later, Robert returned, expression grim. No one had seen him. The cabin lay deserted, every trace of Johann's belongings gone, as though he had never been there at all. A low curse escaped Halbert. Robert murmured an apology, eyes downcast. Halbert paced as his mind turned over the series of strange events. Johann had arrived at the mansion without a resume, hired on Daniel's quiet referral alone. Now, he had vanished without crossing a single camera's gaze. Halbert pulled out his phone and dialed his brother. Daniel answered with bright surprise, teasing that the sun must be rising in the west for Halbert to call first. Pleasantries flowed out until Halbert cut through them, voice edged with steel. Where was Johann? Daniel feigned momentary confusion, then claimed he assumed Johann was still at the mansion. Why would Halbert ask him about someone living under his own roof? Halbert drew a slow, controlled breath. If Daniel intended to play ignorant, he should be prepared to lose the freedom he cherished. The endless globe-trotting, the spontaneous escapes. There was no way Johann could have left the estate undetected without help. The cameras showed nothing. Daniel exhaled, the lightness draining from him. He admitted the truth. He had not taken Johann, only driven him away after Johann quietly asked to leave. Then he asked what had happened, why Halbert had left those faint telling marks on Johann's skin. Had Johann stolen something? Halbert's fist met the table with a sharp crack. He had no patience for accusations. Where had Daniel taken him? Daniel urged calm, voice careful now. Halbert barely heard him. His thoughts drifted backward to the night after the hospital dash. Cradling Johann's sleeping form, something had cracked open inside him when he first saw that tear-streaked face rushing to save Philip. In that moment, something irreversible had shifted. He loved Johann, and Johann had admitted he liked him, but perhaps that was all it had ever been for Johann, nothing more. Halbert was the one who had completely fallen. He had lain awake wondering how to make Johann feel the same. Jewelry, a house of his own, yet he knew Johann too well. Gifts would only prompt questions Halbert was not ready to answer, and a house meant they had to leave apart. And Halbert didn't want that at all. Then he remembered Johann's quiet reply at another time, when Halbert had remarked that these days, money could buy almost anything, even hearts. Johann said there was one thing Halbert could never purchase, no matter how vast his wealth. Those words had lingered, haunting him. The next morning, Halbert had gone straight to Philip to ask what his older brother wished for, but a sleepy child couldn't provide coherent information. So, he asked among Johann's closest friends until something vital emerged. The previous year, Johann's parents' property had been stolen. Immediately, Halbert flew to Karina, Johann's hometown. But his task hadn't been easy. He would have traced it in no time if it was some rare, expensive jewelry. How is he supposed to find an ordinary watch and pendant that belonged to Johann's parents? And the thieves who had stolen it might have sold it or tossed it away. He had to bring in some help. He reached out to Maria Ennis. She had the support of a large worldwide company workforce network. She remarked that it was refreshing to know that there were problems Halbert couldn't solve. She sounded both surprised and excited. She knew it had something to do with a young man in Halbert's employ. She would ask around and get back to him. Later on, they both headed into the storage space of an auction house where she reported that the items were last seen. It was that moment that the call made by Johann from his bedroom line came through. Unfortunately, the items at that warehouse were not the ones they were looking for. Halbert had attempted to call back, but maybe due to the time indifference, Johann didn't answer. It took a few more days and a few tries to finally secure the actual pendant with Johann's mother's picture inside. Halbert could only imagine the look on Johann's face when he finally set eyes on that locket. Halbert's heart raced with anticipation. But of course, things don't always turn out as planned. He arrived home to find Johann gone. For the first time in a long time, he felt afraid. At a different location, Johann had just started a job as a bathroom cleaner. The supervisor spoke about the importance of the assignment, stressing that an important guest was expected later that day. The bathrooms had to be spotless, absolutely spotless. Johann nodded obediently and began preparing. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to Halbert. He wondered if Halbert had returned safely from his trip. His gaze wandered to the mirror above the wash basin. The first time he had met Daniel had also been in a bathroom. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. The moment he had picked up Daniel's dropped wallet and, inside it, seen Halbert's photograph for the first time. Even now, staring into the mirror, he could almost imagine it looking back at him. Then, a familiar voice broke the silence. It remarked with disbelief that Johann had run away, only to end up cleaning bathrooms again. Johann spun around. Halbert was standing behind him. For a moment, Johann could only stare. What was he doing here? Halbert's expression darkened slightly, as if that wasn't the reaction he had expected. Yet, while Johann looked startled and defenseless, Halbert studied him. Despite everything that happened, Johann looked exactly the same as he remembered. Small, stubborn, and adorable. Halbert reached into his pocket. Finding those items had taken far more effort than he anticipated. He placed the watch and the pendant on the edge of the wash basin. Johann picked them up slowly. Recognition dawned on his face, followed immediately by disbelief. He demanded to know where Halbert had gotten them. Halbert frowned at the question, but Johann's expression had hardened. His voice grew sharper as he insisted that Halbert explain. Halbert hesitated. Once again, he realized he had misjudged Johann completely. He thought Johann would be happy. Instead, he looked furious. Halbert replied curtly that he had bought them somewhere Johann wouldn't know about. Then, he reminded him of something Johann had said before, that not everything in the world could be bought with money. Johann's jaw tightened. So that was it. Halbert must have thought this was amusing. He asked bitterly if Halbert felt satisfied with himself now. Had he bought these items to simply mock him? How is this the conclusion you're coming to? Please, just get that he loves you. Halbert stared at him in disbelief. His voice dropped dangerously low as he asked whether Johann truly didn't understand the reason. Then, his restraint snapped. Johann had confessed that he liked him, and then disappeared without a word. Meanwhile, Halbert had spent days tracking down the lost watch and pendant. Temper flared as well. That was exactly why he had tried to stop things before they went any further. For months, Halbert had been pulling him close one moment and pushing him away the next. Maybe Halbert found that entertaining, but Johann had reached his limit. If Halbert disliked seeing him working there, too bad. But before he could finish, Halbert pulled out his phone. His voice was icy as he gave a short instruction to the person on the other end. The janitor working in the first floor bathroom was to be dismissed immediately. Johann froze. Halbert had just gotten him fired. Rage and helplessness surged together inside his chest. He wanted to shout at him, but no words came out. Instead, Johann turned and ran from the room. Behind him, Halbert shouted his name. The rain was heavy outside, and as he ran, Johann silently cursed at Halbert. Behind him, the hotel entrance erupted into motion. Staff scrambling to find umbrellas. Halbert ignored them all. He stepped straight into the rain and went after him. idiot. How many times will that stubborn boy bolt the moment things grow complicated? Up ahead, Johann stopped at the edge of the intersection. The traffic light glowed red above him. Halbert pushed harder. Wait! Fighting to get his voice heard above the rain. The light shifted green. Johann started to step off the curb. Halbert reached him just in time, grabbed his arm, and pulled him back. Johann tried to wrench free. Halbert tightened his grip. Johann yelled back for Halbert to let him go. He wanted to cross the street. Could Halbert not understand? Johann wasn't going to do this anymore. Halbert replied that he doesn't get to end things when he pleases. Who ran like a scaredy cat when he simply went to buy him a gift? Johann was the one who was toying with Halbert's feelings when he said he liked him. Johann then asked if Halbert truly didn't want him to leave. The day after they had slept together, Johann had woken up to find Halbert gone. He said he would be back in 4 days tops, but a week had gone by and he didn't even call. Johann waited for him, even with the whispers and pitying looks from everyone. Robert, Faberdun, Peter. Halbert explained the difficulties he encountered while trying to secure the lost ornaments. He thought it'd be done in 4 days, but it took way longer than he anticipated. He was in an underground market where phone service was unavailable, so he couldn't make or receive calls. He had called back when he saw Johann's missed calls, and he never really thought Johann would be waiting around for his calls. But then, when Halbert returned, he had already left. Johann replied that Halbert should just stop telling lies. How did he expect him to trust him again? Inwardly, he wanted so much to believe Halbert's words, but instead, he asked Halbert to let go of him, saying he wanted to leave. Inside, Halbert was filled with regret. He made so many mistakes, and now everything was ruined. Instead of arguing, Halbert stepped closer and pulled Johann into his arms. Not a possessive hold, a desperate embrace. I love you, Johann, Halbert said. Please, don't leave. The confession hung between the two of them, like something fragile. For a moment, Johann froze completely, in disbelief at first. Then, the tight knot inside his chest began, slowly, to unravel. His hand slowly rose and gripped the back of Halbert's coat. Then, he finally let himself sink into Halbert's embrace. He softly chided him for just showing up then, when he said he would return soon. I missed you, Johann cried into his chest, as Halbert tenderly held him under the pouring rain. His voice muffled against Halbert's big frame, said he needed Halbert more than he'd ever needed the watch or the pendant. Halbert retorted that he needed a lover more than a bathroom cleaner. He repeated about how he had gone to so much trouble for Johann. As Johann looked up at him with those tender eyes, Halbert brushed the rain from Johann's cheek and murmured that moments like this usually ended one way. Johann reached up and gently pulled his face down. Their lips met under the pouring rain. People hurried past them under umbrellas, horns blaring somewhere in the distance, but the sound felt far away, like something happening in another world. Above them, the rain fell softly, sweet sugar rain. That's it. First BL manhwa I've read and in the books. It was a lot of fun writing euphemisms for smut in a way that makes things less explicit, but I don't know if I want to do a video for something like this again. When I was first scripting, I remember asking my viewers if all these kinds of stories featured one big jacked guy and one slim, pretty femboy, and one viewer immediately identified the big CEO and pretty worker dynamic without me even saying what it was. That was crazy. But as always, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this series. Subscribe for more content, but for now, watch this next video. It's me, Comfy T. I'll see you all in the next one.